Good afternoon, honorable members. When the business of this House suspended for the luncheon break, the honorable member for North Abaco had reserved the floor. The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, it is with a tremendous sense of responsibility, honor, and, well, pride that I stand in these hallowed halls to speak for the courageous and resilient people of North Abaco. I'm honored and proud, Mr. Speaker, because most Abaconians hold dear to an unshakable faith, which teaches that the afflictions of the righteous are many, but God delivers us from them all. The Apostle Paul puts it this way. He says, "We have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power of God and not of us. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Always bearing about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our body." You know, my mother used to say, "Must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free?" And then the response would come, "No, there's a cross for you, and there's one for me." It is my considered view that no country can truly ready itself for a hurricane of the scale of Dorian. And I extend condolences to those who've lost loved ones and all of their earthly belongings during the passage of Hurricane Dorian. I wish also to extend on behalf of the people of Abaco heartfelt gratitude and thanks to members of the security forces, healthcare workers, and others, most of whom went over and beyond the call of duty to assist our citizens in their time of crisis. Thanks to all of you, also, who've opened your doors and your hearts to receive us here in New Providence, in Eleuthera, and San Salvador, in Xioma, in Andros, and elsewhere in this country. Thanks to the international community that also received us warmly. You who've opened your homes, your hearts, your wallets, we're grateful to you. And we are in need of your continued support and compassion during this hour of need. Mr. Speaker, in all my 57 years of life, I have never experienced anything as horrific as living through the tragic events of Hurricane Dorian. So for me and others who survived this monster killer storm, which pounded Grand Bahama and Abaco for more than 2 days, and the likes of which has never before been experienced in a modern Bahamas, it is not a simple academic or pedantic discussion. It is real. We, quite frankly, have lost too much for it to be just another discussion. To us, it doesn't matter what could have happened or what should have happened before. To us, all we want is the restoration of our lives. All we want is to be able to go back home and to rebuild and to live as we do, industrious Abaconians. My siblings and too many others have lost relatively everything. And so their trauma, our distress, is exponentially amplified in these times. And so I call for calm in our response to us who have lived through this traumatic event. We should all think a little deeper when we respond, because quite frankly, many of us are yet on edge. History will make the determination as to what should have and could have happened, the Lord willing. And so in our strategic cleanup plan, we took a deliberate decision to tackle many of the irregular communities in Abaco in an effort to mitigate any potential of outbreak of communicable diseases in the island. Mr. Speaker, we must never again allow the existence of such levels of vulnerability in our country, in this new normal in which we find ourselves, faced with storms like Dorian. I find instructive this observation attributed to one of our bright young Bahamian journalists, Sloan Smith, as stated in the 13th September 2019 Guardian Weekly, a British publication, Mr. Speaker. And I quote, "After Hurricane Dorian, the normal procedures of disaster prevention, preparation, and mitigation will simply not be sufficient. We are now facing the difference between living and surviving," end quote. We are now moving hastily, Mr. Speaker, to clean up the mountains of debris from the long-standing communities, my home, Dundastown, Murphytown, Central Pines, and other places, inclusive of Treasure Key, Cooperstown, Little Abaco, and the Keys. I am exceptionally proud of Mr. Garnet Edgecombe, the Chief Counsel in North Abaco, for the leadership he demonstrated in doing the initial cleaning as quickly as they did in those small communities. That said, I know that there's yet much, much more work to be done in North Abaco and Little Abaco. The levels of compassion and generosity that we are receiving in Grand Turtle Key from the Grand Turtle Key Foundation and others, which donated large quantities of building supplies to that community, is unmatched. In Grand Key, Gigi and Carl Allen and the Walker's Key family have committed tremendous resources toward rebuilding that community. I wish to take this opportunity to urge residents, if you within the sound of my voice, to put your debris out front so that we can be able to collect them and clean up our communities, continue to clean up of our communities. As indicated by Bamboo Town last evening, our ports are just about ready to receive international shipping. And that's a tremendous feat this early in the game, I think. I'm also aware that many persons are inquiring about supplies and the framework and criteria we're looking at and finalizing. This is critical as we want to give assistance to those who are in need. I met with Samaritan's Purse. I know we've all heard that name on a number of times in this place this morning, and they have committed to helping us to restore our lives in Abaco. And many more, Mr. Speaker, are making similar commitments of generosity and goodwill and really outpouring of love toward us in this time of need. I'm pleased to inform that BPL is working around the clock to provide electricity to all residents in Abaco. BPL is in receipt of a generator capable of providing power to all the communities of Cooperstown to Crown Haven. This immediate short-term measure is underway. There are so many persons who we should commend for the strength, the faith, and the inspiration that they exhibited during this crisis. I think of the airport staff at Treasure Key who, despite having lost the airport and the firehouse, they report for duty every day, and they sit under a tent so that they can receive airplanes on our behalf. I wish somebody could just, I don't know if you can hear it. I'm encouraged by the efforts of the private sector to rebuild. Steps are already underway to reestablish businesses destroyed by the recent hurricane. I fully expect a major food store to reopen before Thanksgiving. A pharmacy will reopen in that store as well. And we're hopeful, optimistic, that banking services will soon return. I'm advised, Mr. Speaker, that Bakers Bay, which was the largest employer of my constituents in North Abaco, has begun calling people to return. And Bakers Bay, Mr. Speaker, has tremendous plans for the redevelopment of that project that they do in Bakers Bay. And they too have been a part of the process of assisting and evacuating and providing food and they, that's the kind of corporate responsibility that you'd like to see in a constituency. A company as big as Baker's Bay will house their people here in New Providence and look after them. And I'm told continue to pay them. And that should be applauded, and the type of example of the type of citizens, corporate citizens, that we'd like to see in the Bahamas. The sleepy fishing community of Grand Key, you know, they're well underway. They have electricity. I'm told that the only houses that are not reconnected to power are those that still have issues with their roof. And so they don't want to take any risk and to return power to those homes as yet. $1 million has been set aside by the Allen family, the Walker's Key Group, to address the issues, the concerns, and to help with the rebuild in Grand Key. And you know, if you know Abaco, Grand Key and Walker's Key are like about 10 minutes apart, right? And so that is a tremendous act of generosity from yet another group of corporate citizens that are in our community. And so, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act 2008 will help us to survive by addressing several key issues, inclusive of the following: empowering the government through the Prime Minister to prevent certain activities and to protect lives, to maintain peace and order in the wake of a disaster like Dorian. When people are so traumatized, they tend to behave outside of their characters. And we saw that in Abaco and in Grand Bahama. To ensure citizens understand that first responders will not be put in harm's way to come and rescue you after people have asked you to move. To put teeth into evacuation orders and to provide for the urgent relief to impacted areas. The bill and others that will follow is intended to reform the way this country treats with catastrophic events like Dorian, which is unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, our new normal. This amendment bill, Mr. Speaker, will help us to institutionalize, not respond ad hocly or in an ad hoc fashion when these things happen. We hope that this bill would help us to materialize a playbook that all islands can follow in the path of these monstrous killer storms. Mr. Speaker, I neglected to mention at the outset Administrator, name eludes me now, Duncombe, Maxine Duncombe, thank you, Minister, who, in my mind, had a Herculean task, and to the best of her ability, did her best. You know, we had to coax her to leave Abaco because she's from Cooperstown, and when you leave home after such an event, you feel a sense of abandonment. But Maxine was there, tooth and nail, fighting for the people of Abaco. Upon his visit to the Bahamas to view the destruction of Dorian first time, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the following: in our era of climate crisis, hurricanes and storms have turbocharged. They have come with greater intensity and frequency, the direct result of warmer oceans. In explaining the ferocity of Dorian to the world in his national statement at the UN General Assembly, the 74th session on Friday, the 27th of September, just passed, the Prime Minister informed the world that at its peak, Hurricane Dorian had sustained maximum winds of 185 and gusts in excess of 220 miles per hour. There were storm surges 18 to 23 feet above normal tide. Some call it a king tide, which Southerners explained to me today. Even as a naval officer, I didn't realize it was a spring tide. I thought it was a super spring tide, but you said it was a flood tide. I think you said it was a flood tide, which I saw as a super spring tide because the moon was extremely full. A king tide. Who could build resilience for that type of monster? You know, a reporter asked me, do you think, in the heat of the moment, he asked me, do you think you've done enough? I said to him, well, you tell me, who could build resilience to withstand a monster that sits on you for 3 days, relentlessly pounding you. Because remember now, while the tail of the hurricane was in North Abaco, and the eye was approaching Grand Bahama. That shows you how massive this monster was. Who could build resilience to withstand the forces of a Dorian outside of Nassau? I don't know. Sylvan Mills is he had his church, an auditorium which stood by the grace of God. And I asked him how, because I went there as soon as I could, because he had about 300 people in the place. And I spoke with them one night, and I asked him how. He said this was built by a scientist who used to work in the aerospace industry. And that is the type of technology that we need in the Bahamas today to address the devastation of these storms. Sloan said something else from that article I mentioned earlier. And she said this: the devastation of Dorian will be recorded in the country's history alongside the tales of the great Abaco hurricanes of 1932 and 1926. I always remember my grandmother telling me about a 1929 storm, but I hadn't seen anything much about it, because she said to me that storm displaced them from a place they call Old Place and caused them to come into Dundas Town in that area. With respect to international aid, Mr. Speaker, just ahead of Dorian's arrival, the ministry alerted our international strategic partners, including the UN and other donor countries, of the likelihood that their assistance would be needed in the storm's aftermath. As per our routine, the ministry also embedded personnel in NEMA so as to expedite the process of passing vital information to our international partners and friends, and in an effort to secure humanitarian assistance. Additionally, our overseas missions were also tasked with speaking with international donors and relief workers on the priority needs of the country. Our Honorary Consular Corps also pitched in, doing what they could to bring attention to our plight, resulting in donations to assist in our recovery. Support from the international arena was swift and abundant. Following the passage of Dorian, the United States Coast Guard Drug Enforcement Agency immediately assisted with search and rescue and evacuation of injured persons. This assistance was soon expanded to include on-the-ground assistance by military personnel from the US, the United Kingdom, the Dutch, and St. Anne's was just telling me he saw me on a tractor. That was a Dutch tractor, and they had reconnected the road between Little Abaco and Great Abaco, and I thought it would be only fitting that I go down and thank them personally and to ride across that road. And they happily said to me, you know, you got to come up on the tractor. And I started thinking, boy, what you gonna look like up on a tractor? Thank you so much. I wish you would say that.
She said it.
Yeah, he said it.
Can you accept his words?
It was Anglican with tremendous gratitude that I thank the international community and many non-governmental organizations, at which point I think I was told that we had something like 1,400 NGOs in the Bahamas assisting us. And so through my counterparts and others in many countries who reached out by telephone to offer condolences to the Bahamas and the Bahamian people, we are very grateful. And further, during the recent hunger in New York, many countries indicated and reiterated their intent to provide for the Bahamas in the aftermath of this storm. The only concern I have is that you're only as alive as the next event, and then these agencies move on and forget you. And so it is important, as Minister Rowell stated yesterday, Garden Hills, that we build capacity. And so it was genius almost to put people along with some of these people so that we too can be able to respond and help others and ourselves in this Bahamas when there's crisis. That said, there were many high-level visitors to the Bahamas, too many to mention, following the passage of Dorian. These included, I'll mention some, CARICOM states, heads of CARICOM states, a number of U.S. congressional delegations, secretaries general of world's major multilateral organizations, such as the Commonwealth Secretariat, the United Nations, and tomorrow we expect to receive the Secretary General of the OAS in Almagro in the Bahamas. It is important that these visitors be received in the Bahamas at the highest level possible, as it will help not only to show solidarity, but to also serve as a catalyst to galvanize concrete international support for the overall recovery endeavors and efforts to maintain climate change and related issues at the forefront of our concerns. You know, Mr. Speaker, small island developing state foreign ministers are quite au fait with the issues associated with climate change. Everywhere we go, every international community that we speak to in multilateral forums and bilateral forums, we tell them, you know, we are least offensive in black carbon emissions, but yet we suffer the most. I say this now as well, you know, in law and real property law, you learn that the burden and the benefits run with the land. Well, we are bearing the burden, but this land is receiving very little of the benefits. And so it is unfair to graduate us into middle-income countries, which prohibits us from receiving the type of concessional lending and loans that we need to rebuild in the aftermath of devastating events like this. What is also interesting to me is that I watched in New York and I attended a forum for climate action led by the Prime Minister from Jamaica and Solberg, I think, is from the Netherlands, or Norway, is it? Solberg. And a lot of European countries pledged to double their response to the Green Climate Fund. But my question was, how we are still in the hurricane season, we're grateful, and I don't want to seem ungracious or ingracious in any way, but how do you operationalize the fund so that we can get the monies on the ground now where we need them to help build resilience? And we don't mind if you send your own companies to the Bahamas, or you create a czar to manage the monies, who will come to the impacted area, wherever we are, and say, approve the spending of the money to build resilience, to put underground cables so that we can survive after these storms hit us. You know, Marsh Harbor, which is the nerve of Abaco, has to be rebuilt in a way that will cause it to be sustainable. There has to be sustainable, resilient development there. Now, that comes with two challenges. You want power and you want it now, but it takes time to build the resilience that you need. It takes time to do that. And so at some point, when all of the tallies are done, I will communicate, Mr. Speaker, to this House on the donations we received from the international community and others in their effort to help us to recover. With respect to recovery efforts on the ground assistance, the United Nations team was in the Bahamas from the onset, and the team was led by the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA. It was comprised of agencies such as the World Food Program, the United Nations Fund for Population Activities, the United Nations Development Program, the International Organization for Migration, and the Food and Agriculture Organization. While working in close collaboration with OCHA, a system was developed to register international humanitarian organizations and to monitor their actions in the country. These organizations include Samaritan First, which I just mentioned, Rubicon, Global Medic Canada, and many others. Invaluable support was also provided by the European Union and the Caribbean Disaster Management Group, SEDEMA. With respect to the work of the Passport Office in the aftermath of Dorian, the Passport Office in Freeport resumed limited service on Thursday, the 5th of September, just days after the passage of this monster storm. And they too should be commended, because many of them had to live through the ravages of Dorian. Officials issued the completed passports that were in the office's possession prior to the arrival of the hurricane, and their efforts proved to be very helpful, as many persons were attempting to leave the island. And the office was open from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., even though there was no running water to the building and generator power that provided electricity. You know, Dorian, perhaps most people would want to see, well, not most people, some people would want to see the worst that Dorian brought out in us, but many of us saw the best of Bahamians and Dorian, and the activities of Bahamians on the ground, at times risking their own lives, putting themselves in harm's way to help neighbors who they found stranded and seeking assistance. The passport office in Abaco has not yet reopened. Most of the staff, all of the staff in fact, have relocated here to New Providence or elsewhere. The challenges we have as a government in places like North Abaco is that the government has been totally displaced.
Right.
And so people who should be normally in their space of work, we're now trying to put, I think they arrived last night, we're trying to put some mobile homes in there so that we can return the government, so that we can get things moving in a more orderly and aggressive fashion.
Yes.
With respect to the waiver of passport fees and other application requirements, the government waived the fees for the replacement of e-passports for those persons from Abaco and Grand Bahama whose passports were damaged or destroyed or lost. Documents for these persons are already in our system, so new documents are not required. The applicants are only required to provide a completed application form, a passport photo, and a damaged passport, if that is possible. The passport office has been asked to provide statistics for the number of persons applying for replacement passports, and this information is forthcoming. As it relates to the passport services in Abaco, well, I said that already, that office is not yet open. This is only a sampling of the work undertaken by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the days before, during, and after Dorian. I commend members of the ministry for the response and ongoing work associated with Hurricane Dorian. Working 10 to 12-hour days, receiving and responding to countless diplomatic notes expressing condolences and support. Mr. Speaker, we made 2 points basically in New York every time we had an opportunity to speak to it. We said to the international community that the Bahamas has been struck in the north, in the northern region, but we're still open for business. And then we spoke about the imperative of building resilience in our country. Mr. Speaker, my brother from South and Central Abaco eloquently and passionately, as many speakers yesterday, said that we are bloodied, but we remain unbowed. We will, Mr. Speaker, by the grace of God, the people of Abaco, we will rise again. You know, we came from minor fishing villages. If you go from Sandy Point all the way to Grand Key, and you stop in the middle in Central Abaco, around Treasure Key and Cooperstown, Little Abaco, and you see an industrious people who were able to echo their space in the world that we grew to. People say the second, the third largest economy in the Bahamas, but I always thought we were second. outside of New Providence, I always thought we were. You know, people from Grand Bahama become offensive when I say that, right? But here's what supports my position. My position is supported by this. We get more flights than we were normal.
Yes.
We got more flights in a day than they got in a week.
The Grand Bahama.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how they say. I don't know how. Somebody got to do. Oh, we love Grand Bahama. We are sisters and brothers in Grand Bahama. All our families are there.
That's a northern thing.
But I say to my people in Abaco, we will rebuild South Andres by the grace of God. But I say to our people in Abaco before I take my seat, Mr. Speaker, that this is not going to be a short journey. This one requires patience, this one requires thought, and this one requires a little deliberation. And so, for those of us who have taken in our people, extend your courtesies as long as you can, and as much as you can. And I thank God, Mr. Speaker, that Dorian didn't come by night. Because we have a lot to be thankful for. If Dorian had come by night, we would have a different story to be told here. We've lost lives, too many lives, Mr. Speaker. But God was still merciful and graceful in the way that he treated us in the passage of Dorian. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm indeed grateful for this opportunity to stand in this historic place and give voice to this bill before us. Mr. Speaker, let me first give thanks and praise to Almighty God, Yahweh, Elohim, the omnipotent, omniscient, the omnipresent God, who indeed is worthy of all the praise. To the people of the great constituency of Golden Isles, I wish to thank them for this opportunity, and I wouldn't dare take it for granted. I have but a few words to say, but Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to not speak to the issue of global warming, but just sort of to bring a balance to it. I've been hearing so much about global warming. I just want to present something in scriptural, give a scriptural reference that in Psalm 9 and 17, it says, "The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God." Habakkuk 3, 1 and 2 reads, there's a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. It says, "O Lord, I've heard thy voice, thy speech, and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years, make known. In wrath, remember mercy." God, we know, is a God of love. He's a God of mercy. He's a God of compassion. But he's also a God of wrath, a God of anger, and a God of fury. And nothing happens except he does it or permits it. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to extend sincere condolences to the families that have been affected by this storm and have lost loved ones during or as a result of this horrific, catastrophic storm. May the Lord strengthen, comfort, and keep them during these challenging times. Let us remember to keep them in our prayers. Mr. Speaker, Hurricane Dorian is often described as a storm that could not be compared and cannot be compared to any other in recent times. A veteran meteorologist said to me that in his 40 years in the field, in the profession, that he has never seen anything even comparable to Dorian. Dorian exposed and damaged us in many ways. Human loss and suffering, loss of properties, extensively damaged properties, the adverse effect on our environment, expose our illegal immigrant challenges, and so many other things. I wish to just briefly speak to the effect on our natural resources by the oil spill in East Grand Bahama. To date, more than 119,000 barrels of oil, over 5 million gallons, over 175 acres confirmed affected by crude oil. Mr. Speaker, contaminated our wetlands, contaminated our pine forest, our mangroves, our water table, the second largest in our country and even our ocean. Mr. Speaker, the oil spill was unique in that it was not contained in one area, but was very extensive and could, and more than likely will have generational consequences. Mr. Speaker, I hope that we follow the example of the government of the United States in dealing with the oil spill in the Gulf. The government took charge. They made certain that there was proper litigation and cleanup effort. Mr. Speaker, I visited the site myself. I saw the cleanup efforts. What disturbed me was I saw the young Bahamian men who were working in that area. And Mr. Speaker, they had on no protective gear. They were in normal clothing. The company admitted they were using the chemical benzene. And persons were saying that supposedly benzene posed no threat to the surroundings. However, Mr. Speaker, benzene is a carcinogen that has proven to be cancer-causing. Yet, our young men were working on that site without any protective gear, none whatsoever. I saw. Unbelievable. Absolutely, totally unbelievable. I hope that is not the case now. But they are our sons. And we should be looking out, seeking to protect our sons, our daughters, our citizenry. Mr. Speaker, if I may just speak to the bill briefly. The trajectory of bills and legislations during these times sometimes can be treacherous. In this instance, since the office of the Prime Minister already has powers that I personally believe should be reduced rather than bolstered, it is always good to exercise extreme caution when new legislation surfaces in times of crises and desperation. Mr. Speaker, there's a term known as shock economics. And one of the pillars of it is to draft legislation that will strip citizens of their rights, strip citizens of their liberties, and sometimes their dignity, as they are in a most vulnerable position after experiencing the trauma of a disaster. Let me hasten to say, I do not believe that in this case, in this instance, that is what is happening. But we can never be too careful. We can never be too cautious. Mr. Speaker, as I just mentioned, this bill increases the power in the hands of the Prime Minister, who, as I just said, already has too much power. It is hoped that he would be guided by competent advisors when making critical decisions. It seemed that this should have occurred before this disaster, in light of the evacuation exercise in 2017, shortly after we came to power with Hurricane Irma, when many persons were evacuated from Mike Ave. However, better now than ever, better now than never, pardon me, and we learn and grow from our experiences. Mr. Speaker, it is critically important that we ensure that all the components of this amendment is adhered to. The government has the awesome responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of its citizens and must act accordingly. This amendment can be extremely beneficial if it is in fact enforced. Mr. Speaker, every one of us in these chambers, those viewing and listening, know that in our country, we have a major challenge with the enforcement of laws and policies. We have them on the books, but seldom we enforce them. Mr. Speaker, every citizen should be made aware of this amendment. NGOs and other institutions like churches that can assist the government in this endeavor by hosting seminars explaining what this amendment entails. Mr. Speaker, we live in an area on the map described or called Hurricane Alley or Hurricane Zone. There's no reason that our educational institutions from K level or from grade 1 or from whatever level in primary school up to whatever level should not be educated with regards not only to this bill, but as it relates to hurricane preparedness. From June 1st to the end of November every year, it's known as the hurricane season. So there's no reason we shouldn't be educated. There's no reason we shouldn't be informed. We should not be prepared. Mr. Speaker, we need to be much further ahead in this regard. Dorian has spoken loudly. Dorian has spoken clearly and emphatically. Dorian has demonstrated things that we should have done and things that must be done at this time. This amendment can be beneficial in allowing the government to register who is in our country when they're being evacuated. We must know the persons in our country, in our borders. In many instances, it can pose a national security threat. Hurricane Dorian obviously exposed the need to address this critical issue and this national concern. Mr. Speaker, the rebate of license fees, of course, will be welcomed as businesses try to rebuild. The exemptions will certainly go a long way and will help residents to begin as they go through the rebuilding process. Mr. Speaker, we must look at the response time of insurance companies and settling claims that in many instances, in too many instances, take too long, and persons are left defenseless. Mr. Speaker, the government must ensure the process of building and rebuilding, for example, obtaining the necessary exemption, building permits, then it's a relatively smooth process. The government must ensure that evacuees are located to shelters that have been inspected by professional engineers and building contractors and deemed suitable and safe. Dorian, like Andrew in '92, will cause us to change building codes, building designs, probably, as they speak and forecast more superstorms for the future. Mr. Speaker, the looting issues and challenges that we heard about, that was experienced by many, if this bill is enforced, they can be curtailed or even eradicated. I believe this is an excellent initiative to ensure the safety of first responders. Persons must be made aware that once the decision is made to remain, that they would be on their own and they would have to suffer the consequences that could result from such a decision. The fines, the penalties, and so sad in many instances, the loss of life. Mr. Speaker, it's times like these that challenges us. And in many instances, persons spoke to me about having their faith challenged. There were persons who said to me in no uncertain terms that they only made it because of their faith, because of their belief, because of holding on to God. Reminded me of Psalms 46. As I conclude the first 3 verses that says, God is a refuge and a strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. And the 10th verse says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the earth. I will be exalted among the heathens. Mr. Speaker, we are a resilient people. I call on all Abaconians, all Grand Bahamians, Bahamians from all walks of life, Bahamians and those residing among us legally. We call on you to come and help us rebuild. Mr. Speaker, and the member from South Andros spoke to it yesterday. But please, in this process, Mr. Speaker, I beg that we must offer our young men, our young black males, an opportunity for empowerment through employment in the rebuilding process. Give them an opportunity. Give them a chance. Please, I beg you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mamuta. They approach me almost every day. They want to know when can we go? Where can we go? How can we become a part of this process? Bahamians from Grand Bahama to Inagua, from Bimini to Meguana. This land is my land. This land is your land. This land is our land. I believe the Bahamas is for Bahamians first and foremost. So let us rise, let us work, and let us build. This is the time for leaders who will side with God for their people, and not leaders who will side with some people as if they are gods. Mr. Speaker, With the help of Almighty God, we will rebuild. With the help of Almighty God, we will recover. With God's help, we will continue moving forward, upward, onward, and together, till the road we trod leads to our God. We simply say, march on, march on, march on, Bahama land. May Almighty God, Yahweh Elohim, continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and make the wealth common. A luta continua. Long live the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Golden eyes rest.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? Honorable members, while we
I saw one of the speakers ahead of me.
received the lectern for the member for Angleston,
Thank you.
I heard comments being made about king tide and wondering what a king tide is all about. I'll see if I can offer an explanation that don't further confuse you. But usually in science, we don't refer to the tide as king tide. It is an exceptional spring tide. And the spring tide usually occurs based on the alignment of the sun, earth, and the moon. When we get an exceptional spring tide, the alignment is such that the moon is at what we call in science, it's perigee. So it's a perigeal tide that is a higher than normal spring tide. You know, the moon rotates in an elliptical orbit around the sun. When it is at its apogee, it is at its farthest point away from the earth. When it's at its perigee, it is at the nearest point to the earth. And so when there's alignment between the sun, moon, and earth, when the moon is at its perigee, that is when you have this exceptional spring tide that we call it a king tide in normal terms. And
we call it flood tide.
Can you explain that again, please? Can you explain that one more time?
and so that is what we experience in Hurricane Dorian. Now that is most unusual. Very unusual to have a hurricane moving at the same time when you have the alignment with the earth at its perigee with the moon, or the moon at its perigee with the earth. To have that exceptional high tide or spring tide that would cause the storm surge to be even more catastrophic. So that is not a normal. It's not a normal. Thank God. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Angleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I stand on behalf of the people of Angleston in full solidarity with the people of Abaco and Grand Bahama, who have suffered so much as a result of Hurricane Dorian. The stories of the harrowing life and death experiences which people confronted, the many who died and the many still missing, the many who had to fight for their lives and who were forced to stare death square in the face. It is all too painful for the imagination. It was for me surreal, Mr. Speaker, to see firsthand the utter devastation in Abaco and Grand Bahama, the sheer scope and completeness of the destruction. It is difficult to comprehend. But in the midst of this terror, our country has witnessed the most noble examples of courage and selflessness from largely working-class Bahamian men who went out in that murderous storm on jet skis and boats, risking their own lives, rescuing scores of people who were trapped in ceilings and buildings and in the elements, and they saved lives. This has turned many of our perspectives upside down, and perhaps this is the one good that has come out of this terrible tragedy. But in truth, this is the history of the Bahamas. It's certainly the story of the Progressive Liberal Party. Ordinary people, not the elite, who created a political upheaval and initiated the quiet revolution for freedom for the Bahamian people and for generations yet unborn. Today, this government is seized of the mammoth challenge of restoring and reconstructing these critical islands. I sat in this house and I have listened to all the speeches about climate change and the impact of hurricanes. Those of us on this side understood those issues long before now because we lived it. In our last term alone, from 2012 to 2017, we were challenged by two major hurricanes, Joaquin and Matthew. Joaquin destroying vast portions of the southern Bahamas, Long Island, Crooked Island, Acklands. Even then, in that hurricane 4 years ago, even then, there were the many stories of survival, of people retreating for safety in their ceilings as the water levels rose in Long Island. And Matthew, which targeted our population center, wreaking tremendous havoc on Nassau and Grand Bahama, and I believe Andros also.
Definitely.
The then Prime Minister, during that political term, executed the Paris Accord on behalf of the Bahamian people. In the lead up to the Paris meeting, the United Nations tasked countries to submit plans detailing how they intended to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Bahamas was fully participant in this critical process. Prime Minister Christie, as he then was, sought personally to raise awareness on this issue. And he spoke frequently and everywhere about this phenomenon of climate change, of global warming, of superstorms, and the vulnerability of our archipelago to rising sea levels. There was a sustained effort to raise awareness on this critical issue by the then government. With this in mind, and in light of the powerful and damaging hurricanes which have hit our islands, I cannot help but remember in dismay the attitude and the wild accusations that came from the other side in that now infamous first "the cupboard is bare" budget speech debate after the 2017 general elections. At that time, we were about 6 months out of the effects of Hurricane Matthew and just 18 months in the aftermath of Joaquin. We sat here, the four of us on this side, and watched the brazen minimization of the impact of the hurricanes on the country's economic performance. We listened to the allegations, the innuendos. We were accused of mismanaging the economy and engaging in shady activity like making the VAT money disappear. They said our actions led to multiple downgrades by ratings agencies. They said that through our recklessness, we failed to grow the economy. It was rank politics and gross misrepresentations which whipped up a frenzy in the public domain, inciting political hatred. We argued then that it was a disservice to the Bahamian people to minimize the terrible impact of natural disasters, particularly in our own country. Instead of seeking to dumb down the Bahamian people with a polarized, narrow argument, this government ought to have discussed honestly and openly the impact of tropical cyclones to our nation and the sustained impact on our economic progress. The risk that as a result of climate change, our beloved nation may not be sustainable in the face of rising sea levels. And as a new government, I would have hoped they would have articulated an informed, progressive policy position to take the country forward. It is ironic, therefore, that the Prime Minister last week laid on the table of this House the Standard & Poor's Bulletin dated the 3rd of October 2019. He later to make a different point, but embedded in that document last week was the following statement, and I quote, "The Bahamas has been affected by at least 4 other serious hurricanes That's in addition to Dorian. We believe, this is Standard & Poor's, this elevated environmental risk has contributed to below average growth for the Bahamas when compared with peers with similar GDP per capita. And then they go further. Despite efforts, vulnerability to natural disasters continues to affect the country's credit worthiness. Mr. Speaker,
Who said that?
that is the Standard & Poor's. That's terminology for the downgrades. They say, Standard & Poor's said, and it was laid here by the Prime Minister, not the PLP, not Perry Christie, not Angliston, but the terrible effect of hurricanes, natural disasters, has negatively impacted our economic growth and led to downgrades in our credit worthiness. And it is in truth more than the 4 hurricanes. We've had, for several years, successful administrations have had a series of destructive hurricanes. Francis, Jean, Joaquin, Matthew, Irma, and now Dorian. And the downgrades by ratings agencies, including of the airport at some point, were not a PLP thing, despite the propaganda. Indeed, in 2011, under an FNM administration, the country saw in that one term its second downgrade by a ratings agency in that administration alone. We inherited that scenario in 2012, including a struggling recovery out of the Great Recession of 2008. I'm very serious, I don't know about you, Pinewood. It was through extraordinary efforts that the then administration was able to see the opening of the Bahama Resort, which has led to the growth in GDP and record tourism numbers that this administration now boasts about. After that highly politically infused, the cupboard is bare budget speech or debate, we then saw the backtracking of the wild claims. Remember the pressing of the media, which showed that the claim, and this was a claim, that the prior administration, of which I was a part, diverted $40 million in public funds for hurricane relief to use it to buy an election. But later, begrudgingly, it was admitted that it was not true. But as fate would have it, this government has had its own wake-up call, worse in its devastation and more significant in its death toll than we have ever witnessed in this country, as far as I'm aware. It is estimated the economic damage may be as much as $7 billion. This is particularly worrying when we take note of a most recent IMF report. And I'm referring to it here. There's a BBC report about this. And the IMF has said that world growth is slowing down. And they say that the global outlook remains precarious. This is their most recent report. The international lending body said in its annual report, at 3%, there is no room for policy mistakes. The IMF...
Honorable member.
Sorry.
Can you give the title? And
sorry, yes. This is the IMF International Monetary Fund annual report, and it's as reported in the BBC site, which I've downloaded offline. Thank you. The IMF, which downgraded its forecast for most of the world, predicted that growth in advanced economies would slow from 2.3% in 2018 to 1.7% this year. They are projecting a slowdown in global economies. It is, and this is what has happened to us in the face of this. It is unfortunate that this administration did not see fit to establish continuity in a mature understanding of this peculiar vulnerability of our country and its meaning to our people. It is indeed a crisis of most monumental proportions. The Minnis administration chose instead to run a narrative which was a hangover from their general election campaign and introduce into their governance strident division and vitriol and confusion, especially in a matter of which every Bahamian should have an unfettered understanding and a completely unified embrace. For narrow political purposes, this administration took the nation through unnecessary drama and set back what was an informed process for the benefit of the Bahamian people. But today in this debate, we are hearing a preaching to the choir about the impact of storms. We are hearing devout testimony from the new converts now that the shoe is on the other foot. We are hearing about climate change, natural disasters, and the terrible impact on our economic health and development. These realities did not emerge suddenly with the passage of Hurricane Dorian or the emergence on the scene of the Free National Movement administration. So what is the lesson here? Do we not understand that a more informed, more highly sensitized populace as to the fate we face as a small island developing state, with rising sea levels caused by global warming, creating more ferocious and deadly storms, should lead us as a people, whether it's FNM or PLP, to more enlightened policies, progressive strategies to protect ourselves individually and at the national level. But instead, this administration chose to gain cheap advantage at the expense of our nation. The country deserves mature, enlightened leadership. Let's look at the issue of evacuation. You played politics with that too, with your inconsistent policies. See, you have to be careful of the message you're sending to your people when you're seeking to educate them on a matter. Do you remember that 2 years ago, the national airline, Bahamas Air, was used to evacuate people in the days before the landfall of Hurricane Irma out of Inagua, Ragged Island, Mayaguana, Acklins, and Crooked Island, in what Prime Minister then boasted or described as the largest evacuation in history, sending aircraft after aircraft, free of charge, to evacuate more than 1,500 persons from harm's way. Indeed, the Prime Minister then declared that this effort preserved a generation of Ragged Islanders. It seems that that particular evacuation policy was abandoned in the approach of Dorian, despite knowing, assuming that you got the same briefing that we were afforded, thank you to the Prime Minister, despite knowing that this would be an extraordinary storm with tremendous flooding, 3 times the height of Kalani, and that in Abaco, that there were hundreds living in low-lying shantytown, substandard housing, people in the Keys, those exposed to the shores in East Grand Bahama. But this time, there were no evacuations. Instead, Bahamas Air tickets were on offer at $150 per person to be evacuated, and to be evacuated where? There was no shelter in New Providence that was opened or commissioned until well into the storm, and I know personally about that. There were no heroic evacuations this time. In fact, and I want to understand, I'm not pointing a finger per se, I'm showing that you have inconsistent policies or muddled approaches. You send confusing signals to the people. This time, we had the painful spectacle of traumatized people who had lost everything and almost their lives, and probably lost loved ones, being required to pay to get a seat on Bahamas Air to get out of ravaged Abaco in the aftermath of Dorian. This inconsistency in an evacuation policy has served to engender confusion in the country. Members of this government keep trying to show how better they are than us, but I believe the track record thus far proves otherwise. But I don't want to engage in that because, I think the track record, I think the facts are there, but I don't want to get into that because that's not the purpose of my thing. Members of this government, in my view, the response to this deadly catastrophe has been slow, and they know it. You know it. There have been costly lags. And I can perhaps forgive you for failings, but I cannot accept your self-praise in the face of these blatant failings. I have a problem with the self-praise. Please do not tell me let me just say this, that I have lost my right to critically analyze and assess these events, and that in doing so, I am somehow being divisive. I stand in solidarity with the Bahamian people, in that there is no politics and there can be no division. This means we must speak in the interests of the Bahamian people. People, not to be politically correct in some perfumed la-la land. In truth, it is the Prime Minister himself who has been playing politics. Even now, in his communications in this Parliament, there is a continuous political thread mixed with repeated self-congratulations. For example, the claim of speeding up response to recovery efforts has yet to be seen. When people are suffering, every minute counts. It's painful, it's suffering. Delays in getting relief supplies to Abaco by the Royal Bahamas Defense Force relief vessel, the HMBS Lawrence Major, almost 1 month after the fact, is egregious. Failing to open the West End Airport when it was able to be opened immediately after the event so people could receive. Don't go there now. I hope you know.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for West, Grand Bahama, and Bimini on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, to our knowledge and from what we were made aware of by civil aviation, the West End Airport was opened when the all clear was given, which allowed for numerous airplanes to come in and assist with hurricane relief efforts. Whether or not the member for Angliston would have received other information that was demonstrating that this was not happening, then we would need to know exactly where that information came from.
Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised the member for West End would challenge me on that, because I know of which I speak. It was not opened, and it was many hours after the all clear was given before that airport was open, and the minister knew it. The minister gave a reason for it, you know. Okay? Don't challenge me on that. Hours, many hours afterwards.
From the information that we had with West Grand Bahama and the airport, the information that we received indicated that the airport was open. I would like to know at what source of information was given, and I stand to be corrected if it was, but I would like to know specifically where the information came and how many hours after.
You know, I'm surprised the member for West End needs me to inform her about her constituency and how that runway was not opened many, many hours after the all clear was given, and it wasn't until the alarm was raised by me, actually. No, Mr. Speaker, no.
I would like to know,
Speaker, what is this?
after the all clear was given, that it was indicated that we weren't open. Many hours does not exist. Was it an hour? Was it 2? Was it 3? In a hurricane and having to go into relief and recovery, we should all be aware that it does not necessarily take a second, but I would like to know how many hours.
Honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want the member to cause me to embarrass the member for Freetown. So leave it as the way I say to you. It was many hours. That airport fell between the cracks, and it's unfortunate because after a hurricane, the one thing you do, and I know because I served twice, 10 years, the one thing you do is if you can open an airport, you open it. West End was able to be open, and it was hours afterwards, and it was not open, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I'm not answering no question for you, man. It's in question time. Speaker, it's not a question time.
Honourable members.
The member should know if she's a representative, political representative.
Honourable members, honourable member. Honourable members. Honourable members. Honourable members. Now, here's the position of the chair on this matter. Honourable members. The member, honourable member, I'm speaking now on honourable member for Angliston. You made an assertion. Honorable members. Honorable member for Angleston, could you resume your seat a moment? Honorable members, the normal procedure with respect to points of order is that if a member makes a statement and another member denies or challenges the statement, any other member, doesn't have to be a minister, any member who rises and challenges the statement, the person making the allegation is required to indicate. The simple question was, Honorable member, why are you on your feet? Why are you on your feet? An assertion was made. It was denied. The assertion was that after the oil clear was given by the Department of Meteorology, the airport was not open for many hours. The member for West End and Grand Bahama is denying that allegation.
Let me say this to you. I think that I'm now being tried to answer for a member who's not the minister about the issue. I was informed by the minister that had not been opened. I'm speaking from my own personal experience. Is that okay, Mr. Speaker? And it was many hours after the all clear was given by the Department of Meteorology, Speaker. May I continue now, Speaker?
Hold on, just before you continue.
The member for Freetown, member for Freetown. Speaker, Speaker, many hours. I don't have the exact information from me. It was in excess of 10, 12 hours, Speaker. In excess of 10 to 12 hours. The airport should have been open, and it probably was even more than that, Speaker. Can I move on my presentation, Speaker? That's the facts. The member for Freetown can come and speak to it.
Wow.
No, there was no debris. That was not the reason. That was not the reason. There was no reason. The airport was able to be opened. And I don't want to go into the detail of it because the member for Freetown knows what the issues were and why it was not open. It's nothing to do with the state of the airport, Speaker. And I don't want to get stuck on that. The member for West Grand Bahama should know the airport wasn't open. She don't need me to come in here and tell her that, Speaker. Mr. Speaker, turning away relief supplies from caring and generous international donors who felt our suffering is egregious. Having no contact with the people on the Keys like Manowar, Green Turtle, Hopetown, Moores Island, and accentuating their isolation in distress is egregious. Using language which may give the impression that the loss and suffering of Grand Bahama was less critical than elsewhere is egregious. And to not extend the exigency order to everyone in Grand Bahama, including the West, is egregious. I want the member for West Grand Bahama to get up on that. The poor treatment and neglect of our armed forces who are being deployed to these difficult areas is egregious. But despite this, the Prime Minister sings his own praises. We think his claim of an effective financial strategy, which is how he describes it, to deal with disasters is somewhat premature, or assigning to themselves, the Free National Movement government, foresight, when there's yet to be proof of foresight. The lauding of yourselves for the decision to reinstate CRIF, the insurance facility, defies the facts when having paid close to $4 million in premiums from public funds, and considering that the economies of Abaco and Grand Bahama being approximately $2 billion or 20% of the Bahamian economy, how could it be that we will get out of this arrangement $13 million, just under? And when you compare Dominica with a $400 million economy in total, receiving some $23 million in insurance benefits, something is not right with this arrangement. So who are you telling that this was a good decision? You credit yourselves for the signing of a $100 million contingency loan to allow for, in your words, a rapid response. But thus far, that rapid response is lacking. And with IDB, I'm afraid, I hope you don't have to go through those procurement rules, because that's going to be, ain't going to be no rapid there unless they change their procedures. And then we were told yesterday, and I don't know if it's correct, that the exigency order has been stopped or varied. People are trying to bring in supplies in ravaged areas, and they're being told that there's been a modification or some cessation of the exigency order, which is now causing for levying taxes on the aircraft, paying all kinds of funds out, etc. Not being able to bring in items now under this order. And if that is the case, I'm wondering if someone from the government side would explain the policy position where you only just got the HMBS Lawrence Major there a month later, while you're putting pressure on people who've been totally mashed up in this way. It seems to me a very short period of time, if that is the case. But I'm understanding that is the case. And now you brought this legislation to mandatorily evacuate people or face imprisonment or fine or both. This is, in our view, another distraction or a deflection from scrutiny of this administration's handling of this tragic circumstance by placing the focus on the victim. The member for Cat Island has ably demonstrated that the Constitution is the foundational law which provides for exceptions to our civil liberties, and that this current amendment is thereby unconstitutional. And in any event, the provisions for enforcement are impractical. I think what the former Prime Minister England would say, what you're going to do, you're going to go to someone else, arrest them, and then keep them in handcuffs in the shelter? They're not practical. Or you're going to hope and pray they survive and then go arrest them afterwards? And the evacuees are going to be compelled from their homes to go where? Would it be the shelters such as the ones that became the most recently dangerously compromised in Grand Bahama and Abaco? And then questions are raising about questions, people are raising questions about liability. You have to be very careful. The key to raising awareness and public safety is to educate our people on the risks. This is my message. This is why I started with the covetous bear debate. The key to raising awareness and public safety is not this law or anything, but is to educate our people on the risks. That is why what this government engaged in after the elections is so wrong. We must ensure that all of us become what I call street experts on this dangerous phenomenon. Disaster preparedness must be taught in schools so that we can inculcate a full awareness in new generations, because this issue is not going away, but it will become more complex, more critical with the passage of time. We do not support the bill for the reasons already previously expressed in this debate. What we do need to see now is people-centered livelihood and reconstruction interventions with a short, medium, and long-term developmental needs of local communities. It must immediately be implemented a systemic policy of income subsidy, if it's not happened yet, at least in the short to medium term. We need to see government-centered interventions to restore and reconstruct infrastructure and reassess building codes and zones. Accelerate efforts to get roads constructed, docks built, the airport and Freeport going, as there are currently no international flights going into Freeport or Grand Bahama. The same for Marsh Harbor, so as to allow for critical inflows and outflows into these communities. As Exuma and Ragged Island has asked, where is the plan? This is a very delicate time, and it requires focused execution of a comprehensive redevelopment plan. I wish to address one other issue, and the member for Golden Isles spoke to this, and that's the oil spill in East Grand Bahama. And I think he covered it very adequately, so I will only say this. It is clear that the Bahamian people are not receiving timely reports on this very serious oil spill incident, which is now receiving negative international scrutiny. This is, in my view, a gross dereliction. We need to know that we now know that it is more serious than had been previously understood or admitted. It is not respectful to the people of Grand Bahama and the Bahamian people in general to not inform them as to the meaning of this spill. And not to do so lacks transparency. The minister must now step up. In closing, we invite you to drop what I call the fake machismo. Reach over across the aisle to us, even a strong woman like me. We want our country to thrive. We want our country to thrive. We want a sustainable, beautiful Bahamas for generations yet unborn. Let us put our heads together and rebuild in an enlightened way with a progressive energy policy, with enhanced infrastructure strategies, and an informed approach to national development. In other words, out of this disaster can come something very shining and beautiful. The people of Abaco and Grand Bahama, indeed the people of our country, are depending on us at a time such as this, all of us. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for St. Anne's.
It is indeed a pleasure to rise.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Kalani.
I do apologize for the late rise, Speaker. The member was doing such an excellent job, I did not want to. I did not want to disturb her.
She was in the bullpen.
Her role, and I was having such great admiration for your comment. But the exigency order, no, the exigency order, there was some confusion. The exigency order continues to the end of the month.
For Kalani for that, and I think that gives some comfort level out there. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for St. Anne's.
Speaker, it is indeed a pleasure to rise on this side on behalf of the good people of the great constituency of St. Anne's in my new position at this side of the bench. Eggleston should know how I feel because she's the only member of that party in Nassau. I've been there too, so she should know. So with that comedy, it was good to follow the comedy hour, half hour that just happened with regard to the member for Eggleston's speech, because she was part, as she said, a minister for 10 years and failed, along with her Perry Christie, Davis, Ingram, Davis, Christie, Hannah Martin administration to educate and do all the things she's asking us now to do. And I sit there and with amazement, when these persons from the opposition ask us to join them, and they forget we were on the opposition many times, and we was left in the proverbial cove. So, you know, what was it we said this morning? Where you sit is what you say, or whatever the words are. I'll leave it at that. You can put your words to. Thank you. You know, so that the show, the grandstanding and everything else like that. You know, we had to stand over here and be mashed like cockroaches by the former fella who led that government, and so we knew nothing. So I'll just start at that. I'd like to start by saying thank you very much certainly to the member of Fox Hill and the member for Golden Gates, certainly in the Fox Hill Constituency Center, which, as we know, the government spent some $13 million building. So it's an interesting place with no lease, but we'll address that at another time, because they showed a lot of passion and benefit to the people of that area and the people who evacuated from Abaco and Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, I intend to take a different tack today, possibly because of my slight independence over here, and address this issue. We have had speaker after speaker talk admirably about the heroic efforts the tragedy, the grief, and the whole many aspects of certainly South Abaco, Central South Abaco, and North Abaco, who are in their constituencies, along with the members from Grand Bahama, while this traumatic hurricane hit, have very well expressed the horror, the pain of the hurricane. Members have spoken about what their ministries are doing. You know, I'm only grateful that we are here being led by a Minnis administration in this hurricane, because the woulda, coulda, shoulda government never had a plan. Our plan was, the only our plan they had was a manifesto that they lost on. You know, and since then, we moved on. So, you ever watch the former Prime Minister used to sit there, never read a page of his speech, so I don't know how he had a plan. But anyway, we at least have a plan in extending a ministry to renovate and to move the way forward with this hurricane, to make sure that the problems that happened or the difficulties with NEMA or whatever will be part of a historical review. Now is not the time to look at he didn't do this or she failed to do this, because at the end of the day we're all human, and those people had to get up in the morning having had no sleep, no water, running water, no beds, and still no houses, deaths and missing people, and try and provide service to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and they should be applauded for that. How can you run a government when the government, certainly in Abaco, has been displaced by a hurricane? Mr. Speaker, we talk about, so I'll just say one or two quick things on the bill. One of the things that the member for Eglinton talked about evacuation, and I know the member for Carmichael will be addressing the constitutional issue of that, being more seasoned as an attorney than I am. But we failed to mention some of the beauties in this bill, which is actually Clause 27B, which allows the Prime Minister, you know, we got this paranoia about giving the Prime Minister too much power, that he can go in and relieve or waive VAT and duty. That's something that would have to require us to come back to Parliament to have a 3-day debate, an emergency, when we need to waive VAT and duty. I talked to the member for Killarney earlier today about the whole question, for instance, of duty and VAT on diesel fuel. Here are people in the Bahamas buying diesel now that it's available. You know, a lot of us don't understand the way diesel got to Abaco and some of the Keys was in the boats that went for the recovery effort, because there was no way of tankers and freight getting there. They came from Spanish Wells and many places in the United States, and the fuel was taken in ballast or in the fuel tanks and pumped out into the tanks. Propane tanks were not available, so people couldn't cook. All of these things. So this gives the Prime Minister, with a stroke of a pen, literally, the ability to be able to affect waive duty, exemption of excise tax, exemption of any tariff or tax, waiver any fee. So we don't have to come back and pass a law like, for instance, we're going to debate next week or whatever, the amendment to the fees for the passport regulations. That required coming back to Parliament to waive a fee for a passport. Under this bill, when passed, the Prime Minister just puts his John Henry and the duties disappear. So we're talking about streamlining and affecting and getting in the hands of the people of the Bahamas. That's what we need to be able to do. That's a very crucial part of this. Saving the lives of people and asking them to move where people don't want to move. Essential. Now, we might say, how are you going to evacuate 200,000 people out of Nassau? That's going to be an interesting issue if you have to evacuate. Because in one hurricane, the evacuation order happened on the west end of Nassau, and I'd gone to sleep. So I probably would have been arrested under this law because I was asleep. When I wake up the next morning, I should have evacuated. But I don't know. We can look at that. Mr. Speaker, the drift of my few minutes that I want to speak today is slightly different than what members have done here, so I hope I have a little bit of free range on this issue. We have to take the effect of Hurricane Dorian, with all its problems, with all its catastrophes, with all its sorrow, and turn it in reverse, and turning it into a redefining moment for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We have to take this issue, we have to say to the financial people around the world, I'm sorry we agreed to a balanced budget. I'm sorry we agreed to whatever, 1.5 per GDP or whatever those fancy numbers are. We have to park that for a couple of years. We have to say, no, we had good intentions of getting the budget back, you know, the multiple millions we had to spend that the previous administration left behind. They forget that. We were well on our way. We had paid down, what, $200–300 million. We had a program over 3 years. We were going to bring ourselves to the balanced budget. But something happened along the way. Park that. Park that. You know what? Engelson's saying, yeah, they didn't do a good job when they were trying to manage it either. Matter of fact, they did a waster job. So let's not, waster. So let's not go there. Let's not go there. So what we need to do is go back. Yeah, that's my opinion. You gave yours, I give mine. It just happens the majority of people in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas last election voted for Hubert Alexander Minnis, not Perry Gladstone Christie. 35–4. Bam. That's what the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas felt. They entrusted the next 5 years in the hands of Killarney. You do it today, and I bet you we'd win again. Because they have confidence, as Torpine said this morning, the dump got fixed. You can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it, it's there. And properly done within a balanced budget and done. What I'm suggesting today, Mr. Speaker, is that we take this as similar to the Depression era in the United States. We need to reset government in the Bahamas. We have to take this horrific event, this, whatever we want to call it, and push the reset button. And it could be from getting a driver's license, where you need 3 picture IDs. Let's reset that button. You go in with an old driver's license, you're still Brent Simonet, you have a picture on it, you get another one. And the ease of doing business, we're 118 out of 190 or something, push the reset button. On every level of every aspect of government, push the reset button so we don't have to see these things happen. We saw it in the passport office the other day. There's a backlog. So we said, okay, the new policy is if you have an electronic passport, you bring your electronic passport in, and now we're down to, I think, 5 days. The minister's done a fantastic job. Passports are, my son went in on Friday, he got it on Saturday. So we have to use this, and we have to inculcate in government employees and the private sector, it is a new day. Don't say, I'm sorry, I out to lunch, or I can't do it, or the printer don't work. We have to reset. We have to reset another thing. If people owe government money, pay it. Because the government needs money to reconstruct after this. We have to get private sector involved. So let's say there's a private-public partnership agreement, whatever, we do it. We not only do it for the non-Bahamian, we do it for the Bahamian, because there are many Bahamians that are willing to get in the system. The Prime Minister's heard me say many times before, and I've said it when I was over there, we have to take something like the Bahamas Investment Authority, revamp it, put it back on the road, and send the person responsible traveling around the world, not only to say that the 14 islands are open for business, but the entire Bahamas is open for business. So we take that 0.8% projected growth for next year back up to 1.8, where it was before the hurricane. That is the future plan, Mr. Speaker, and I know the government of the Bahamas have that in their mind because they've already started putting out feelers. Yes, we have to fix Grand Bahama. Yes, we have to fix Abaco. But a lot of those people came to Nassau and other islands, and we are feeling the pain here because people here can't support their families and their loved ones. And I mean, just driving around this island, you see a tremendous effect of extra cars, of extra people. So we have to rebuild the economies and grow the economies of the islands that were not hurt, as well as rebuild the economies of those that were severely damaged. Because there are going to be people in Grand Bahama and the Abaco and the Keys that don't rebuild. We have to face that now. They may have decided, come the time in my life to retire, I don't want to rebuild, or I'm not going to go back into my law practice, or whatever. So you are going to have a fallout as a result of the hurricane from those type of things. So let's take a figure. I don't know, $50 million. Put it into the capital budget, and let's prime the pump that generates the economy of the Bahamas. Hopefully this is not a F&M PLC thing, because it takes all Bahamians to get the project going. So if it's small loans department, let's take the pressure off the bottlenecks off, get money in the hands of those persons who have good projects to do, and we will see the entire country rise, which will give us the ability to fund and take the shock of the next hurricane. Whether it's fishing, whether it's agriculture, whatever it is. Government own a lot of property, for instance. Maybe we need to fast track the blowing up of the post office building, just because it then puts in the hands of small contractors that the one York government built in 1968 that had structural problems ever since then, that had a fixed deal in that one. No, you canceled that contract. You were the masters of cancel in 1967. You canceled everything. You were the masters. You were the masters. You were the masters. No. You were the masters. You were the masters of that. So don't go there. Don't go there. So whatever. So what we need to do. Anyway, I mean, I'll go there. Let me stay focused. So, because, no, Angus had better watch for her seat, because we come in for that next election. We can leave Andrus alone. But we come in for Angleston. And this ain't nothing. Just be coming for Angleston. we can hold on to those other ones we got too. Don't worry. So we're gonna. But seriously, on a serious note, we need to push the reset button on all aspects. Those people who owe government money must pay it. So if you've got things like real property tax, you've got outstanding fees, we've got to collect that. Because I'm told, say, in real property tax, the majority of the real property tax is owing on commercial property, not residential property. So therefore, there's no pain. There's not much pain in collecting fees. Minister of Bamboo Town. One of the things, we need to start to install a higher degree of law and order in this country. I won't tell you, there's two things that annoyed the you-know-what out of me this week. One was a taxi in the yellow box on Bay Street with a police officer looking at them after the new law came into effect. The other was the number of people still on cell phones. This sounds trivial against the background of the devastation, but we have to start to inculcate a new regime, and that's the reset button. Respect for law and order, and then a lot of other things happen. You're collecting your outstanding taxes. You're making sure you're giving service to people who need service. You come down on Shirley Street and you stay outside the births and deaths office now. The queues are horrendous first thing in the morning. Registrar, we need to find a way to get those people birth certificates, because those of us who haven't suffered from it, we don't feel it. I keep saying that when I was the minister responsible for immigration. Unless you knew what it felt like not to have a passport and not to have papers, you never felt. And I'd say it every time I swore people in. When I was minister, I swore people in every 2 weeks that I was in the Bahamas. It's easy for me to say, I have a passport. But when that person gets his citizenship paper and takes it down to the passport office, he doesn't want to be told, come back with a birth certificate and something else, because he's got a certificate signed by the minister saying he's Bahamian. So give him his passport. And we have to do that in every single ministry, so that what should take a day is taking a day, not taking weeks. Whether it's building permits, whether it's we complain about some of the issues of persons not getting the supplies off a dock. We need to make sure the public relations goes out so that everyone knows full well that X, Y, and Z can come in duty-free, or whatever, VAT-free, or whatever else. But that's the relief side. The rebuilding side is we have to now encourage persons to invest in our country. Now, if they invest in Andros, it's just as good. If they invest in Inagua, it's just as good. Because we need to grow the economy. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what I really wanted to address in a... You know, your man represented them for a while, and I'm sorry, your roads didn't get where they're supposed to be. But under the Prime Minister Minutes, your roads will get taken care of. So, Mr. Speaker, I fully support the Disaster Preparedness Response Amendment Bill. And I think we should make sure that we go out of here not only amending the law. Now, whether we wanted to argue whether it's constitutional or not, I'll leave that up to the lawyers. But we do have people. I have a brother-in-law that stayed in Manawal. For days, we didn't know whether he was alive. You know, you feel that was probably as stressful on people waiting for that news. Now, certainly, you don't expect to send a first responder to him. No. So those persons have to be responsible for their actions. Now, if they endanger others, that's a serious issue. So we have to get those people to understand when it comes time to evacuate, you evacuate. But that's past us now. We now need to rebuild. So if you come up to Grand Bahama, you come up to Abaco, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, that's in the hands of a ministry, of which you have a very qualified Minister of State responsible for that ministry, who's away now in Miami, as I understand, doing his job. You have two capable members for Abaco that are able to lead that restoration in Abaco. You have numerous West Grand Bahama, Central Grand Bahama, East Grand Bahama, and Marco City, and the other members from Grand Bahama, who are very capable of making sure supplies have been distributed. We've heard that. Now it's a question of making sure, for instance, we did the Carnival Heads of Agreement, you did the Bahama Heads of Agreement, that we keep that tap flowing. So there's 500 people going to be employed at Bahama. We need that 500 here. We need a couple hundred here. We need a few more hundred here. Because it'll take a while for those persons to get back to Grand Bahama, and we can employ them here. So, for instance, I've heard there have been several persons from Grand Bahama who've already got jobs in Spanish Wells. A couple of them are working in different places. Their kids are in school. They may be a year or two before they go back, but they've integrated into the economy. And I'm amazed how many jobs have been found on this island by persons who have been relocated. They have found jobs already right here in Nassau. Because, they were, whatever reason, whether they were qualified, whatever, they found jobs. They want to work. And they also want to go home. But we also have to, I think, and I'll finish on this, push the reset button, start the investment tap coming in, get every different non-Bahamians, Bahamians, involved in building, in reconstructing Abaco, but also starting new businesses, so we then move forward and we take the red tape out of whatever government ministry there is, and we move forward to build a better, stronger Bahamas for all Bahamians and all persons who live there. Mr. Speaker, with those few comments, I'd like to thank the first responders, security services, and I think everyone's done a very good job at doing that. The donors, the international donors, and persons I think have covered it far better than myself. And I adopt the protocol of what they've said in thanking people for what they've done. Because at the end of the day, we've all said the Bahamas is, for us as Bahamians, we have nowhere else to go. We have to together build a stronger, brighter future for our children and our children's children, for a better and more lasting Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy that the member for Anglican remain. I want to make a correction. Earlier I said end of October. And then my technical people had sent me a message that it has extended until the 2nd of December. So I don't want you to say I've misled the House. But what it also means, if you vote for this bill, then they would get all of these concessions and more. If you don't, you're sending the message that you don't care, and I know you care.
But thank you to the member for allowing.
Why, Brent, you got better on the back row. God is good.
As many. Chair recognizes Honorable Member for Carmichael.
Speaker, I'm honored that my friend stayed to listen to me. I know he has important things to do. Speaker, I rise to support this bill, which is timely, it is purposive, and it is critically important to the Bahamian people. First, I begin by thanking the members of this honorable House, and indeed the Bahamian people, for their kind thoughts and prayers a few months ago when my mother died. I'm grateful to all of you. I also pay tribute, sir, to my late sister Donna and all other breast cancer victims as we celebrate their lives. I didn't ask you to wear pink today, sir. I should have asked you. Secondly, sir, as always, I thank the residents of Carmichael for making it possible for me to be here today. I shall never, ever forget the confidence that Carmichael has reposed in me, and I try to live up to that confidence every day. Carmichael, too, has had challenges with flooding of up to 2 feet of water in Bel Air and on Mermaid Boulevard West after Dorian's passing. But as I speak, sir, we are working to create innovative solutions to this challenge that has historically plagued Bel Air. And today, sir, Carmichael residents are able to see the work that is currently going on throughout the constituency to prevent flooding in the future. Third, Mr. Speaker, I salute the courage and the resilience of the Bahamian people, especially our brothers and sisters in Abaco and Grand Bahama, including the honorable members of Parliament for the various constituencies in those islands, all of whom I understand rode out that horrible storm with their constituents. Mr. Speaker, we have seen innumerable acts of bravery by Bahamians throughout this country, including medical support staff, police and defense force officers, and also, sir, by ordinary, everyday citizens. They're all heroes. And I join the most honorable Prime Minister in saluting these extraordinarily Bahamian heroes during this National Heroes Week. Speaker, I now turn to Dorian's devastation. To put this debate in perspective, sir, a recent article in Scientific American explained that Dorian's very slow motion of less than 5 miles per hour and extreme intensity over the Bahamas for 27 hours at Category 5 strength allowed that terrible storm to subject this country to the most fierce and prolonged battering by an Atlantic hurricane of any populated place in recorded history. That article, sir, took the position that Hurricane Dorian was worthy of a Category 6 rating, if any such rating existed for hurricanes. That is what we face today, sir. The circumstances are unprecedented. Speaker, the Marsh Harbor that I knew is totally gone. Totally, completely. The landmarks and the buildings that I knew no longer exist. Twisted and distorted structures stand in their place. In some instances, only floor tiles are left to tell us that a building once stood there. In other places, sir, there's only debris, and the stench permeates the entire community. Much of East Grand Bahama looks like a wasteland, with homes devastated and possessions scattered in the wind. The impact has been disastrous. Some of the communities look like war zones. So many homes have been lost. Many jobs no longer exist. Precious lives have been lost. There is much work to be done by well-meaning and industrious Bahamians. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak a little bit about hope for our people now. What, Mr. Speaker, we will recover like the mythical phoenix. Abaco and Grand Bahama will rise again out of the ashes and out of the debris. The challenges that the country faces are unprecedented. All of us are feeling the impact. Speaker, every member of this parliament has to be concerned about the well-being of our people. And I know that they all are. We all are. Every time that I hear of another body being found, as I did yesterday, I think of how critically important it is for us to take this bill seriously and to enact it without delay. That is exactly, sir, what this caring government is doing today. Mr. Speaker, prior to the arrival of Dorian, the Most Honorable Prime Minister continually advised the nation of the potentially devastating impact of the storm. He pleaded with residents in the path of the storm to evacuate. Some listened and took action. Others didn't. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister did not have the legal power to order people to evacuate prior to a disaster occurring. If he did have that power, I'm convinced he would have utilized it in the interest of preserving lives. But members opposite insist that we do not need to amend the law. Mr. Speaker, with all respect to my friend here, they are out of touch when they say that. And they remain clueless as a clawless crab. Speaker, once passed, the bill will permit the Prime Minister to protect the health and the safety of our people by ordering the movement of persons, or by imposing curfews, or by prohibiting travel routes, or by ordering certain businesses to close, or by authorizing certain persons to render essential services that our people require. He will also be able to authorize steps to be taken to suppress looting, home or shop breaking, assaults, anarchy, or civil disorder. Speaker, this bill is needed yesterday. Members opposite did not have the vision to enact it when they were in office. But I'm grateful, sir, that this F&M government has the courage to bring it here and to enact it. So, Speaker, as a government, it is our duty to protect the vulnerable and to protect the weak. And yes, sir, we have a duty to protect those who are not prepared to protect themselves. That, sir, is one of the characteristics of a caring F&M government. I want to just talk a little bit about cleaning up. Speaker, I thank the many professionals of the Ministry of Public Works and the other agencies that fall under my portfolio for responding promptly, efficiently, and caringly, even when many of them had their personal lives turned upside down. I especially commend Assistant Engineer Tony Hudson Bannister in Grand Bahama. That tiny woman who catches me about here worked herself to exhaustion, notwithstanding the fact that she and her family were exposed to danger. Tony and her staff are special to us, sir, and we will do all that we can to support them. Mr. Speaker, in order to do our work as effectively as we are able, the Ministry of Public Works is pleased to welcome Senior Engineer Bridget Berneau, who rejoins the ministry after several years in his native Canada. Engineer Berneau will be an officer in charge of the ministry's Abaco office. The ministry also welcomes Senior Engineer Clint Bain as officer in charge of the ministry's Grand Bahama operations. These two highly experienced engineers hit the ground running, sir. They have both made an immediate impact on those islands and will continue to lead the ministry's efforts in both Abaco and Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, as soon as it is safe after the storm, the Ministry of Public Works mobilized contractors to clear the roads in both Abaco and in Grand Bahama. We have reinstated areas where roads were washed out, including the Little Abaco Bridge, which we will rebuild some as a resilient bridge, not as a vulnerable causeway that members opposite constructed at the cost of millions of dollars to this country.
Thank you. Thank you.
We then sent assessment teams to both islands. Those teams have worked in the most challenging of conditions to provide assessments of the condition of structures in those islands. In the process, they're utilizing a computer program that has been provided by UNDP. The program permits them to chart the damage that every structure suffered. We can then use the computer to review exactly how much damage every single structure suffered without going back or checking anything. To speak up to Friday, the teams had completed the following assessments. The total building assessments in Grand Bahama, 2,050 residential assessments, 132 commercial assessments, 28 mixed-use assessments, 52 public buildings. We have public buildings on one number of buildings in one compound count separately. That's 2,262 of those assessments. In Abaco, 444 residential assessments, 16 commercial, for a total of 460. With residential damage assessments in Grand Bahama, where there's minimal damage of less than $2,500, 1,060 assessments. Where there's moderate damage of about $5,000, 420 assessments. Where there's severe damage of $7,500, 350 assessments. Where property is destroyed and non-salvageable, or over $10,000, 210 assessments. That's 2,040 assessments. In Abaco, where there's minimal damage, $2,500, 123 assessments. Where there's moderate damage of $5,000, 88 assessments. Where there's severe damage of $77,500, 128 assessments. Where a building is destroyed and non-salvageable, 95 assessments. That's 434 assessments in Abaco. The dollar amount of assistance that's going to be required, we estimate just from those assessments that have been done, not a total dollar amount, just assessments that we've done. For the houses with minimal damage, $2,957,500. For the houses, the buildings with moderate damage, $2,540,000. For the houses with severe damage, $3,585,000. For the destroyed and non-salvageable houses, $3,050,000. That's a total of $12,132,500. And as I said, we are not finished, but that will give you an idea of where we are going, Mr. Speaker. And I'll be prepared to provide that to any colleagues who wish to have it. Speaker, our staff will continue to focus diligently on their tasks, and I commend them for their dedication. Excuse me. Mr. Speaker, my ministry is cognizant of the health, sanitation, and legal challenges that the shanty towns present to our society. 4 contractors have been engaged to systematically clear the shanty towns, the mud, pitch and pea, sandbanks, and the farm. They will simultaneously fence the properties in, and they're putting cement on the bottom of the fence. They're working according to precise plans that permit the delayering of debris in a manner that permits them to sensitively scan the sites and uncover any human remains that may still be there, so that any body that may be found will be treated with dignity and with respect. Mr. Speaker, there's currently a no-build order that prevents any construction on any of the sites. Signs have been posted, and the no-build order will be strictly enforced by the contractors working closely with law enforcement authorities. Mr. Speaker, there will be no reconstruction and there will be no new construction on those sites. And I will confirm that during my visit to Abaco tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, both Abaco and Grand Bahama have been divided into zones. And the Ministry of Public Works is currently in the process of engaging local contractors. In fact, a number of them signed the contracts today to clear debris within those zones. So, Speaker, I want to caution everyone that only contractors who are duly contracted by the Director of Public Works will be paid. This F&M government will not engage in the type of helter-skelter operation that members opposite carried on to the detriment of the Bahamian people during their tenure in office. Can you imagine, sir, that we are still receiving claims for millions of dollars from pseudo-contractors that PLP MPs put to work without any official authorization and no proof that they even did any work? Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people have already judged members opposite for their disorganized, unfocused, incompetent, deficient, uncoordinated, inadequate, flawed, and unreliable response to smaller hurricanes. No credible criticism. You weren't in the cabinet. You were my friend. They didn't put you in the cabinet. If they'd put you in the cabinet, they would have done better. No. The good news at the end. No credible criticism can come from that discredited side with respect to the manner in which this minister-led F&M government has responded to the needs of our people after experiencing the most devastating Atlantic hurricane in history. Mr. Speaker, when this phase is completed, the Ministry of Public Works will commence reconstruction activities in conjunction with the energetic new Minister of State for Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction, my friend, the Honorable Iram DeWitt Lewis. Let me touch basically for a brief while on improving our building code, sir. Mr. Speaker, no discussion of the activities of the Ministry of Public Works would be complete without some mention of the building code. The current edition of the Bahamas Building Code is rigorous, but as with any building code, it is subject to continuous review. The code contemplates protection for a building from winds for up to 150 miles per hour. At one time, it was thought that this was fully adequate. Dorian, however, had maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour and gusts of up to 220 miles per hour. Mr. Speaker, one of the other challenges that we have had throughout our country is that we often build in areas that in normal times will be prone to flooding, even in normal times. And we often ignore the inspection process. I've seen so many homes in Abaco and in Grand Bahama that did not meet the requirements of the code, either because they were built before the code was amended or because they were built in contravention of the code. Moving forward, sir, the Ministry of Public Works will seek to appoint more inspectors to cooperate with local architects and engineers in the inspection process. We will also be more thorough with both inspections and enforcement. Our duty, sir, is to protect the public. We will also continue to review the findings of the aftermath of Dorian with a view to strengthening various aspects of the code. I turn now to BPL, sir. Mr. Speaker, BPL has 3 generating facilities in Abaco. Wilson City has 4 engines that generate 12 megawatts of power each, for a total of 48 megawatts. Normally, this is twice the amount of power that Abaco needs. This facility suffered only minor damage in the hurricane. There's an additional facility in Marsh Harbor, which is ordinarily capable of generating 8 megawatts of power. This facility suffered extensive damage during Dorian. Additionally, sir, BPL lost in excess of 3,000 poles in Marsh Harbor. The third facility is in Moores Island. The challenges that are attendant in restoring power on Abaco relate to the complete destruction of the infrastructure in Marsh Harbor, which utilize most of the power load from Wilson City. Mr. Speaker, today Abaco is on its way back. BPL, along with members of CARELAC, are working together to quickly rebuild Abaco's infrastructure. and restore power in microgrid fashion until BPL is capable of rebuilding its entire network. To date, BPL has spent just over $1.6 million in equipment and materials. Today, more than 30 linesmen, including BPL and members of Carolec, are on the ground in Abaco. Those 30 linesmen do not include BPL generation and support teams helping the rebuild effort. South Abaco. Shortly after the hurricane, BPL sent materials to Abaco on a barge. Some 40 poles were replanted on a 60-mile stretch, Mr. Speaker. South Abaco only requires about 2 megawatts of power, which is insufficient to fire up the Wilson City generators. BPL therefore brought in a 2-megawatt generator from Exuma to service South Abaco. After working for a short period, that generator experienced challenges, which impacted the ability to generate power in South Abaco. BPL was able to move another generator to the island. Work in the south was completed, and power was restored on September 29, 2019. BPL, having completed the work in South Abaco, turned their attention to concentrating on the main transmission line from Wilson City to Marsh Harbor. The date teams are almost at the Marsh Harbor Power Station, which serves as the hub for power distribution throughout Abaco and the Keys. While the team was concentrating on the 69 kV transmission system, other teams have been working in the Spring City community, rebuilding its infrastructure. To date, many poles have been replanted over a 2-week period, and work should be completed in another week ahead of plans to repower that community. In North Abaco, BPL is currently has a 17-man team working to restore the infrastructure from Cooperstown to Crown Haven ahead of repowering. The BPL team is accompanied by teams from Carolec that include a 4-man team from the BVI, a 5-man team from Belize, and a 5-man team from Antigua. It is anticipated that infrastructural repairs will take 2 weeks, after which power can be restored. BPL is currently targeting having the North repowered by Sunday, the 3rd of November, 2019. Keys, Moores Island. Moores Island was the first to have 100% power. Moores Island was repowered 1 week after the storm by BPL personnel. Walker's Key, Little Grand Key, power has been restored to Walker's Key, and 75% to Little Grand Key, with 100% power restoration anticipated by the end of this week. In Green Turtle Key, BPL's assessment is completed. BPL has assembled materials and will mobilize this Friday with all material to the island. BPL's team will be facilitated with a 7-man crew from Caribbean Utilities Company in the Cayman Islands, which will arrive in the Bahamas on Friday to offer their assistance. BPL anticipates that power can be restored to Green Turtle Key by mid-November. Manawaki, BPL's assessment is completed. BPL has been in communication with Disaster Relief Committee, a local committee that was formed to restore Manawaki. Their desire is to have 100% of their services placed underground. BPL has organized follow-up meetings with the committee this coming week to see their proposal. BPL has teams standing by and is prepared to mobilize as soon as it is determined how the Disaster Relief Committee wishes to proceed. Elbow Key, BPL is engaged in discussions with a committee that represents the interests of Elbow Key residents. Those talks will continue with a view to coming to the best decisions for restoring power in Elbow Key as soon as possible. Speaker, with respect to Abaco generally, BPL appreciates the challenges ahead are enormous. Power must be restored throughout the Keys and in Marsh Harbor. Whenever possible, renewable solutions will be considered. Speaker, I want to touch a little bit on Ragged Island. Speaker, this is one of those times when national unity is required. And as the Prime Minister indicated, it is regrettable that the opposition has made Dorian a political issue. History will judge them harshly for that, sir. If I may, sir, I want to touch on the issue of Ragged Island. First, sir, it is quite appropriate for the member for Exuma to raise the issue of Ragged Island. Quite frankly, Ragged Island needs the reconstruction to start, and it will, sir. The challenges have come from the submissions of designs of redesigns and re-redesigns. During the budget debate, I provided Parliament with a glimpse of the current design that I have approved, and we intend to proceed with that in Ragged Island. The opposition has also raised a number of legal issues, Mr. Speaker, and I may just need ask you for a few more minutes. But I want to touch on those legal issues that were raised by the leader of the opposition, which with respect, sir, devoid of merit. Essentially, sir, the honourable member for Cat Island argued that the Emergency Powers Act 1974 substantially covers what we are trying to do now. He's wrong, sir. Dead wrong. The 1974 Act, sir, which is now 45 years old, is based on the provisions of Article 29 of the Constitution. That article applies when the Bahamas is at war or when the Governor General issues a proclamation of emergency, declaring that a state of public emergency exists. And that those are the important words, that a state of public emergency exists, currently exists. First, Mr. Speaker, the term state of public emergency is a legal term of art. This bill is not focused, this bill that we're debating today is not focused on a state of public emergency. So there is no issue of unconstitutionality under Article 29, just to start with. Secondly, when the 1974 Act was drafted, it was not contemplated that we would face issues such as climate change and superstorms. So the 45-year-old legislation that the opposition wants us to rely on in 2019 is deliberately cumbersome. It was drafted to be limited in scope, of short duration, and challenging to put into effect. Speaker, let's discuss the challenges of the 1974 Act that the member for Cat Island would have us rely on today. First, the opposition should appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate can only take effect when a state of emergency actually exists. It cannot be proclaimed in anticipation of a threatened disaster. That means that even though the 1974 Act speaks to restricting the movement of people, that restriction under the Act may only occur after an emergency takes place. So we cannot lawfully order the evacuation of persons in advance of a storm, even though we may know in advance that their home may be flooded by an approaching storm. That's what we're trying to deal with today. Secondly, sir, the opposition should appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate requires that when a proclamation of emergency is made, it has to be laid before both the House and the Senate within 5 days, and then debated in both houses. It would be a waste of time in an emergency for us to sit here and debate for days whether an evacuation order should be made. The storm would come and go, and we would still be debating. Moreover, that law does not contemplate, sir, as Exuma postulated, that Parliament may be wiped out, or God permit, members may be too scattered to gather together in one location to debate what to happen. That's what they want us to do, or what to do. Speaker, we remember those committees. That's what they want us to do. Mr. Speaker, we need action, not words. And at this time, members opposite are only offering empty words, just as they did when they were in power. Third, sir, the opposition should appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate provides that the first proclamation of emergency will only last for, speaking again, I have 5 minutes extra.
Yes, no.
The first proclamation of emergency
So you got 2, and then we'll add another 5.
will only last for 14 days. So after we debated, I thought you were my friend, South Andrews. I only need a few minutes. The Speaker, third, the opposition should appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate provides that the first proclamation of emergency will only last for 14 days. So after we debated in both the House and the Senate, the decision would only have effect for 2 weeks. More wasted time, sir. Fourth, Mr. Speaker, the opposition should appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate provides that if the proclamation is to be extended beyond 14 days, both the House and the Senate must meet and pass yet another resolution to extend it for 6 months. So in order to have law and order restored for more than 14 days, we would have to have 2 debates in both the House and the Senate in 2 weeks. What a waste of time. Mr. Speaker, people want action, not talk. Fifth, Mr. Speaker, the opposition should appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate provides that the Governor General will then have to make regulations under the Act. Another delay that the opposition would wish on the Bahamian people. Sixth, Mr. Speaker, the opposition would appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate provides that after the Governor General makes those regulations, they too have to be debated and passed by both the House and the Senate. Even more delay, sir. Seventh, sir, the opposition should appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate provides that any regulations that are made after this long, cumbersome process will cease to have effect whenever the proclamation does. So that means that the regulations themselves will expire after 14 days. Speaker, this is where I'm supposed to roll my eyes. Mr. Speaker.
Don't talk for no more.
8, Mr. Speaker.
You got 8?
The opposition should appreciate that the law that they wrongly say is adequate provides that those same regulations would then have to be passed again by both the House and the Senate. And this time they would last only 6 months. That sounds, Mr. Speaker, like a year-long process that they want us to go through to protect the Bahamian people every time there's a hurricane or disaster. Mr. Speaker, they want us to be like them, slow and ineffective, but that won't happen, sir. Mr. Speaker, by simply reading the law, the fallacy of the argument that has been put forward by the opposition is very clear. As my daughter would say, they can't be for real. Mr. Speaker, the argument in this debate alone shows that they were known as a do-nothing government. They can never again, never be trusted with the governance of our precious democracy. Mr. Speaker, the new act will give the Prime Minister the power to issue an order to protect precious Bahamian lives when there is a disaster or, and these are the key words, or a threatened disaster alert. Not merely when a state of emergency already exists under the Constitution. So once this bill passes, the Prime Minister will be able to order an evacuation before a storm hits. Not wait until after the storm wreaks havoc on our communities, as the opposition would wish for us to do. There's 2 more pages, please, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be able to authorize steps to be taken to suppress anarchy, civil disorder, assaults, looting or home or shop breaking before the storm hits, rather than wait until the storm has passed, as the opposition would wish for us to do. So the Prime Minister will be able to save lives before a storm hits, not look back and regret, wringing his hands after the storm and pray for the dearly departed, as the opposition would wish for us to do. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be able to order a curfew before the storm hits, not witness the looting after the storm is gone, as the opposition would wish us to do. Speaker, I've heard certain comments criticizing the power in the bill to order a curfew. At the same time, I've received many calls from Abaconians, the people who are impacted, asking when the government will implement curfews to protect them. Quite frankly, sir, I feel more comfortable with the power in this act to order a curfew than the power in the law that the opposition supports that permits unlimited and indeterminable detentions. And that's what's in the law now. Mr. Speaker, in bringing this bill to Parliament at this time in our history, the most honorable Prime Minister can be likened to what Lord Denning referred to as bold spirits, who have the creativity and the courage to allow, if justice so allows, let me say that again, sir. Say it again. Bold spirits who have the creativity and the courage to allow it, if justice so allows, while by opposing this very progressive legislation, those opposite stand in the shoes of Lord Denning's timorous souls, sharing blind allegiance to the dead hand of the past, and in doing so they serve a sterile, non-constructive role in the law. Speaker, this is a health and safety bill, pure and simple. has been brought here by a caring government.
Yes.
Despite the timorous souls, it will be passed by a bold, progressive, caring government.
Yes.
It is in the best interest of the Bahamian people.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Speaker, I believe in the resilience of our people. Abaco will rise again. Grand Bahama will rise to new heights. Carmichael proudly supports this bill, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Pinewood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise by the grace of God and for the good of Pinewood to make my contribution to this bill. Quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, it's very simple. Pinewood supports this bill.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, if the opposition who demanded that we rush back to Parliament for this bill had taken the time to enjoy the debate, I think they themselves would have repented of their intended vote and vote in favor of it because of the enlightenment throughout this bill and through the mic-dropping presentation of Carmichael. Mr. Speaker, these are very, very interesting times. And my colleagues had made a lot of presentations, and for me, I feel that we need to have a good look at the overall picture. In all things, I give thanks. Many times I rise to my feet, giving God thanks because of the struggles that this administration is going through in order to achieve its fiscal goals and to raise the quality of life for the Bahamian people and the many sacrifices. And one of my greatest fears has always been, Lord, what if a storm were to come? One came. Mr. Speaker, I look around and see all the responses that we would have had, and I've heard people saying that there was no preparedness. I think sometimes we are prepared for things even unintentionally because of our good deeds and good actions. Being a member for CARICOM, I've had good experience throughout the community, the Caribbean community, and I've seen our sisters and brothers, and I've seen how some of them are now suffering negative side effects of how they handle disasters. Claims of corruptions, misappropriations. So from day one, when this administration came in and made it very, very clear that we are a government of transparency and accountability, no under-the-table deals, when our legislative agenda began to prove the seriousness of this country to do right business, transparent business, I want the Bahamian people to understand it is because of the character of this government that contributed to the level of comfort to bring about the benevolence that we have and are receiving now in this country today. The same people who are here helping us are still suffering the itch and the discomfort of how they would have helped some of our neighboring countries and seeing their benevolence squandered. But not so in the Bahamas because of the image and the character of this administration. I am pleased and motivated because of the thrust of the Prime Minister in including the diaspora long before the storm, reaching out to Bahamians all around the world. As we prepare a nation, we saw the Ministry of Public Works stepping up to the plate with a new generation of engineers coming across. We see the Prime Minister waking up and bringing into his fold the top students from colleges and say, work with me in my office. And not only that, I will further your education. And the word went far and wide that the Bahamians can come home again. Yes. And as a result of that, that too brought about the benevolence that we're receiving now. Most of the aid is not just from foreigners, but from Bahamians around the world. Being stationed in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I am so motivated to see how virtually all of our consular generals and our consulate around the world were abuzz. They were collecting and actively involved in our recovery that almost rivaled that of NEMA. Ambassadors from all around the world and even the Caribbean raising the bar and coming to our aid because of relationship and reputation. That's why, again, I disdain, I reject, I distance myself from all criticisms that make it seem that we cannot be our brother's keeper. That is not who we are. Let me give you some simple examples. We have a pastor in Florida, Reverend Whitney Shipman of Winners Church. You should have seen them coming together collecting items. We get young, Bahamian people like Carla Jasper Leggett, and there's a lady, her name is Laurenique Stubbs. Bahamians who went to Walmart and say, I want to put carts inside your store so people can give to the Bahamas. And have a Bahamian flag on it, and shipping goods back to this country. Bahamians fighting for their country because they believe, and they didn't just believe because of the storm. They said they were watching. They have confidence in us. Our reputation, our name, a good name brings riches. When we put in place the fiscal responsibility bill, it shows to the world that we are serious. We hog-tie ourselves by legislation saying we will be committed to being responsible to our people and accountable to the people. It is the people's time. I sit here, Mr. Speaker, and I listen and I commend all the heroes that are out there. But some of my colleagues are a little bit, they are modest. I remember a picture that went around the world during the time when Osama bin Laden was shot. He was killed. And you saw the picture, it's iconic, where Barack Obama and his cabinet were sitting there and they were listening into the responses of the troops, SEAL Team 6, as they went in to execute and to deal with Osama bin Laden. And there was an iconic shot of them. I've been in the Churchill building around the table, and we're sitting there as our quiet storm. Some people take meekness for weakness, As a quiet storm, I listened to a conversation, taking almost a 5-minute conversation, taking 45 minutes. You know why? Because we were all there straining to listen to the member for South Central Abaco, James Albury, as he struggled in the aftermath to get a signal out. And his concern wasn't me. His concern is, I need to know what's happening to my people, what's going on with my people. I've seen the criticisms on Facebook, but I was in that room with a man on top, the highest peak he could find, walking around, and every time he get a signal, he tried to finish the conversation, talking with his government, saying, I am the representative and I need to know what's going on. And we are all sitting there saying, you are my brothers, we are your keepers. And we try our best as that man struggled on a hilltop that I could only imagine minutes after the storm would have passed. My minister and good brother, the member for North Abaco, rode out that storm. And I thank God for that Marine spirit in him. Had to commandeer government buildings to save people's lives. We know about Michael Pintard, we know about all. This administration and the members of Grand Bahama not only rode out the storm, they went through that storm and they were with their people all the way. I was even baffled when people were saying about Pine Ridge, saying missing in action. And they were getting negative about it. But Pine Ridge was there with his people in Grand Bahama. If that's not leadership, if that's not commitment, what is it? None of them, when they saw Dorian, decided they're going to take a flight out, They were there. So now you see within our cabinet people who, as is said by St. Anne's, felt it and they know it. So they are in cabinet making sure we show it because they are reminding us that we know exactly what it is. They've lost their homes. I remember up there in Churchill building when we all get together as a government in the midst of all this struggle, cabinet meeting virtually every day, all hours of the day. The Prime Minister, I'm getting concerned whether he's resting. And it was agreed upon that the members of Parliament form themselves into groups. I won't name all of them. So then you saw our whip, the member of Parliament for Foxhill, whom I call Lady Hugs. Why? You know, I'm a Foxhillian, I know what's going on. The member of Parliament for Foxhill, the member of Parliament for Baines and Groundstown, the member of Parliament for Golden Gate were assigned to man the shelters. These weren't member of Parliament playing cutesy or trying to get a camera shot or photo walk. They were on the ground serving people, and we were divided. The Parliament of the Bahamas was divided in teams. My assignment, along with Mildred Hall-Watson and Renard Penfield, we were all given tasks to serve the Bahamian people. It wasn't on camera. These people are minding the shelters and doing their jobs. And Chanel, member of Parliament for Foxhill, was hugging and greeting people. I've never seen a more motherly expression. So your government was not just an action in terms of service, there was an action in terms of heart. So, Mr. Speaker, during this time, they say, in hard times, you see what a man is made of. I really saw the strength of James Albury, Central and South Abaco. I saw the fortitude reignite and the warrior spirit reignite in Darren Hellfield for North Abaco. I've seen the motherhood and passion of Foxhill. I've seen the spirit in Golden Gate. I've seen the youthful energy from being in Grantstown. I see everyone that was mobilized doing a job above and beyond.
I was back in.
Yes, you were. He was.
These are serious times. People said that we weren't prepared. I listened, you know. Say we weren't prepared. And I started to do the math. They spoke about the Crips, saying, oh, you spent $4 million and you only got 13. I was like, okay, hold on, what's the loss in that? I said, what's the loss in that? Oh, you ain't planned, you just went ahead and you set aside $100 million in something that you did not want to vote for. They say there was no plan, but how is it? Maybe sometimes, because none of us are perfect, you know, God works for those whose heart in the right place. None of us anticipated this storm, but God put in the heart of the cabinet of the Bahamas to do this and do that. And in the fullness of time, that which they sowed came to the rescue of the Bahamian people. Can I establish this point? I listened carefully to Nima, Mr. Speaker. And it was just recently, about 2 weeks, 3 weeks after the storm, and everybody is saying about the billions of dollars we collected. And yes, we had tremendous amount of goods, but they were talking about cash. Nima came on in a public press statement and stated that there was little over $3 million, if I'm correct, in cash that they received and deposited from to their accounts. Because obviously all the pledges had not come in.
Right.
But yet the plan that was put in place released $100 million in what? 2 weeks? Yet the plan that is put in place, so what is happening, a lot has been happening, what's happening because of a plan, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. Because all the pledges hadn't begun to come in. That's strategy, that's planning, that's faith, that's direction. I thank God that in the midst of this storm, that the steps of this leadership of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas has been so ordered by God that when calamity comes, as it did, we had a leg to stand on. I thank God for that. In Facebook before the storm, before the storm hit, and as a leader, I'm very cautious about what I say because I try not to excite panic, but it's heavy on my heart, and I did it on Facebook. Because I felt the spirit of Egypt when the death angel came over the children of Israel, and they had to put the blood on the doorpost. And I actually did that on Facebook because I felt that spirit in the storm before it hit and arrived. So when I stand here and I say, I thank God for the covering he has brought on this country, irregardless, irrefutably, without contradiction, I truly thank him. Because God is and will continue to be good to the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, during this time, we had two of our major engines hit. Actually, our main engine got hit. It was not devastated. New Providence was hit, but it was not devastated. We were spared. My community of Pinewood was practically devastated in the heart of it. People who are familiar with flooding did their regular preparations, and the heights that they anticipated, the water far exceeded it. We're to the point that some of the houses, when you go inside of them, they tell them, you can't live in this house because the stench of the mold will cut your sinuses. We did a cleanup in Pinewood, and it got to the point that after the 30th dumpster load, we had to stop. People's houses are gutted with their furnishing and their supplies and everything else. And houses right now, I'm telling people, don't waste your time with sheetrock. You need to get back into Durock. You can't do this no more. I'm concerned with what is happening for my community. And I'm happy that, because I had to seek consultation from my parliamentary team on how we can address this. So some things are happening. In my portfolio that was in that assignment, one of the things I had to do was to help with donors and the raising of funds. So a lot of things that went to a lot of people, you don't know where those things come from, those flights coming in. You don't know who says send that to this way or send that to that way, because all we wanted to do was to get things done. But in the middle of the night, we have been delivering goods and supplies to those evacuees all around New Providence. No photos, no cameras, no media attention, because in many instances, stripping somebody of their dignity degrades the value of the gift you're taking to them. So we've been servicing my people. In Pinewood during the storm, man, we've had to put out fires. We've been through, literally been living in the community. Up until sometime 11 o'clock in the night, we're going to people's houses and providing aid and speaking with them. Because it's not a campaign thing where you're just touching door to door. Sometimes you really need to take the time and sit with these people and help them to understand where you are. But you know, Mr. Speaker, in the midst of all of this, I've seen some things that motivate me. And I'll speak about two of them that seems rather simple, you know. I was in St. Kitts, and a senior citizen came up to me. And you know, their dollar is not as on par as ours. And she said, Mr. Ambassador, I feel for what's going on in your country. And she came, and she said, I'm sending something to you because I didn't know if I would have seen you. And it came. And in the envelope, I told my secretary, mark it. She put this in my hand. And if you see the person, you could appreciate the value of it. This is $113. It got wet in the bag of my assistant. I won't change it. It'll be exactly this. I went to Captain Russell. The Captain Russell, I got a donation to the Bahamian people and the people in Grand Bahama or Abaco. And I said, as soon as I put foot on that ground in Abaco myself, I'm going to give this as is to the family. Because people aren't just giving us money just for politics' sake or camera. They're doing it because they believe in the Bahamas. They love the Bahamas. They feel the pain of the Bahamas. They have faith in the leadership of the Bahamas, that if they put it in their hand, the monies will go where it's supposed to go. And even me in this small matter would ensure that this is supposed to go to Abaco, this is supposed to go to Grand Bahama. The first step on the ground, I will find a family in that name and I will put this in their hand. The second one is, a container came from Walmart. And the church called Winners Church. And in it was a bag of kisses. You can imagine all kind of stuff. And through all that stuff, I found a bag of kisses with a small little note from a child, a bag of kisses. That bag of kisses is in my freezer at home. As soon as I set my foot in Abaco or Grand Bahama, I'm gonna give each one of those kisses out in the name of that child and let those people know that somebody loves you and somebody's care. Why am I talking about something that's trivial? Or you may think it's trivial. My Bible says if you ain't faithful in the little things, you can certainly be faithful in the big things. That's right. And I want to assure the world that what you give to the Bahamian people, it will go where it's supposed to go, it will do what it's supposed to do, and we'll all bounce back. The last point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is to our young men and our people out there. And I have to quote Sir Lyndon, don't mind the noise in the market. Don't waste your energy on the negative criticisms. Your family is hurting, but even in the midst of war, in the midst of crisis, there is always opportunity. And I want to assure you, just as it was stated, people are finding jobs almost more so now than before the storm. That there's opportunity for us out there. But we must stay the course and be prepared to receive the opportunities that are set before us. So I want to encourage all our young men that Grand Bahama will need rebuilding, and it will happen. And we will do it, and you will be a part. Abaco will need rebuilding. It will happen, and you will be a part. And if you notice, the most beautiful sight was the focus of our leader. That Dorian had not left his trail behind more than just a few days. And immediately he reinsured and reassured and bolstered up our economic borders by first of all ensuring that economic development will continue in Grand Bahama. If that's not focus, what else it is? Yesterday we saw continuation. See, some people lose their stride when they reach crisis. A focused leader, no matter what is in his path, always stay true to the course. And so I want our Grand Bahamian people to realize that, do you know that Dorian may have shaken us, but it had not changed our resolve towards making Grand Bahama the second city and making it shine as we know it could. So even to this day, the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is ensuring that while the mud is on the ground, that investor confidence still resides in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. So I must ask you a simple question. If an investor saw a country or an island devastated, and he could look at it and say, what if that was my investment? And if an investor comes while there's mud still on the ground, but yet sit next to the leader of the country and say, I have faith enough to press on with you, what does that say about respect and trust for the leadership of the country? Right now in Abaco, some of us Bahamian people don't want to go back. But yet we see Bahama expanding. We see Gin wants to work. We see all these people are saying, we are with you. Because this is a government that is different from the last. Ain't no corruption here, my brother. What you see is what you get. And when you come to the Bahamas, it is Bahamian first. When you come to the Bahamas, nobody's going to do business to the Bahamas no more. You better come to do business with the Bahamas. The Bahamas is a better place. And I guarantee you, before the end of this term, our Bahamian people will see an increase in jobs, we see an improvement in the economy, and the vision will be made much, much clearer. So, Mr. Speaker, not only do I support this bill, I thank God for the vision of the Prime Minister to correct the past and to empower us to be able to better face any future storms or any future incursion on our sovereignty. God bless.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many?
Mr. Speaker.
Many. Chair recognizes the member for Central and South Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker, I thank God for this opportunity once again to be able to stand in His honorable house on behalf of the wonderful people of South and Central Eleuthera. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy, just before I proceed, I would forego some of my speech because I'll tell you, and I'll make it simple, and I'll tell you why. After coming into this house this afternoon and listening to the member from Carmichael explaining the amendments to this bill, every Bahamian tonight in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas will understand the reason and the purpose for the passing of this bill. Those who want to believe will believe. But there is a clear understanding that the lives of the Bahamian people will be better. It was Jesus himself who recommended that love should be the ruling principle in the old immunity. Also in the New Testament, Jesus commanded that love should be the ruling principle in the hearts of our followers. Those that walk in the light will spread light to those who are around them, and kindness and affection and unmistakable love. Mr. Speaker, we are our brother's keeper. On September 1st, when Dorian released its fury on the Bahamas, more in particular, Abaco and Grand Bahama, Eleuthera is known as the pace setter. You would have heard from my colleagues from North Eleuthera as to what role the Eleuthera played in the assistance of our brothers and sisters in Abaco. We in South and Central Eleuthera met in a town meeting with standing room only to make plans to show love as we were commanded. Mr. Speaker, during that time in that room, there was standing room only. I've never seen Eleutherians come together with such passion and love to render assistance to our brothers and sisters. Mr. Speaker, not only did they just come to that meeting, but they also rendered their assistance in every way possible. And they begin to plan how we are going to get to our brothers and sisters. What are we going to do? Mr. Speaker, members of that group were formed, and it all came from all sorts. And at that moment, Mr. Speaker, we didn't see party colors. We became one. That's what happened in Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they reached out to a gentleman named Mr. Harvey Sasso from Bimini Shipping in South Florida. He was contacted and asked if his company would be willing to accept goods at the terminal on behalf of the people of Abaco. Without hesitation, he agreed. For the next 3 weeks, the kind hearts of people from South Florida, Atlanta, Texas, New York, and other states ordered online direct from Walmart and other suppliers within the USA, and then delivered them directly to Bimini Shipping. Mr. Speaker, the story goes on. Now the question, how are we going to get to Abaco and to hand deliver the goods to those persons in need? Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas Daybreak, Mr. Quincy Sawyer, who does every week a 2-trip service, mail service to the island of Eleuthera, donated his vessel, his crew, and only cost the people of Eleuthera fuel. Mr. Speaker, not only did he do that, but the Bimini Shipping also gave us a vessel from Florida to Eleuthera and back to Abaco. Mr. Speaker, it was God. Mr. Speaker, I would like to publicly thank the following organizations and social clubs who exemplified what brotherly love is all about. Chief Superintendent Adley, who graciously agreed to use the Workers' House Hall, which is owned by the police department, as a receiving and distribution and counseling center. Mr. Deputy, the Chief Custom Officer, Mr. Thurston, in San Jose de Lutra. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Immigration Officer, Mr. Gibson, in San Jose de Lutra. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank all of those financial donors, homeowners, and friends of South Florida and San Jose de Lutra who gave directly for the purchase of the fuel and raw food and supplies. Mr. Speaker, in Eleuthera today, we have documented evidence that over 300 families have been received clothing, personal hygiene items, baby pampers formula, the clothing, water, food, bedding from the Eleuthera Freedom Hurricane Relief, Abaco at Workers' House. More than 1,800 hot meals were served at the park, along with some 60 pallets of water, juice, dry goods, canned items, beds, school supplies. Mr. Speaker, when the residents of Eleuthera came together and they traveled to Abaco on the daybreak, there were approximately 110 persons gave up their entire weekend to go and rescue their brothers and sisters. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say to another young man, Pascal Burrows. He is the owner of a restaurant and bar in Eleuthera. He came together and got his girls, and they were the chefs on board, and they cooked hot meals from Eleuthera to Abaco, a 14-hour boat trip to Abaco. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say thank you to all of those persons who took that voyage. Mr. Speaker, on that vessel we had the president of the Christian Council, Mr. Carl Sands, and 3 of his other pastors who were on that ship with us. And we had devotions before we left, during the trip, when we arrived. Mr. Speaker, that went a long way. I've never seen my people with such smiles on their face. It was something out of the ordinary. They all came together. When that ship arrived to Abaco, Mr. Vado Bodo, along with the local pastors, local government leaders, and uniformed branches were right there to meet us. Mr. Speaker, when Christ abides, the characters to become purified. Mr. Speaker, South and Central Eleuthera were overjoyed to have been able to lend a helping hand to our sister island in the north and Abaco. Mr. Speaker, we must begin to look at how are we gonna improve our country. We must begin to put plans in place as to how we're gonna combat such type hurricanes. No one in this country ever anticipated that this would have came our way, but it came. And in some incidents, we were not prepared because no one, but God has given us an opportunity as leaders today to review our shortfalls, to review what we've done right, and to begin to implement new ways of making our country better and safer, so that lives will not be lost in this country, and that's important. Mr. Deputy, with saying that, I'm not going to say very much. I'm going to keep it short because time does not allow me. Mr. Speaker, while Eleuthera was spared this time, through the grace of God, we must use Abaco and Grand Bahama as our demonstration project for others. Mr. Speaker, as we move forward, South and Central Eleuthera appreciate that our brothers and sisters are not heavy. They are not heavy, they are family. So lean on us. When you're not strong, we will do our best to help you carry on. For it may not be long that we ourselves may not need somebody to lean on. So just call on us, brothers, when you need a hand. or we all need somebody to lean on. Mr. Speaker, I would now shift to something that took place in the island of Eleuthera, in Harbour Island last night. And we had, in Harbour Island, in the northern area, we had a fire which destroyed a gas station, and which was belonged to Mr. Marcus Pinder. Mr. Michael Higgs lost his home, and of course Johnson Rentals lost their rental business. Mr. Speaker, I was en route to New Providence to come to Parliament this morning, and the way we work like brothers. So I decided to go into Harbour Island. Mr. Speaker, it was God himself who saved Harbour Island last night. The winds were calm, and that's where the fire was there, because Harbour Island is a small community. Homes are compact. And on that main strip, Mr. Speaker, if there were winds in Harbour Island last night, there would have been another disaster in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, because Harbour Island is one of our bread baskets in this country. And what is most disturbing, Mr. Speaker, Harbour Island had their own little fire truck there. And last night, they were not able to attach that truck to fire hydrants in that community. Mr. Speaker, we need to do better. Not only does Harbour Island have that problem, but I have that problem throughout my district as well, where I've been requesting fire hydrants for the same purpose, that will save our communities. I'm asking my government today to consider that. I want to send out a thank you to those who fought that fire last night, who went out there last night, and they spent the entire night out there. And my colleagues since have asked me to thank the residents of Harbour Island and those who fought that fire last night, because he was so appreciative. He wasn't there last night, he was here. He was helped us. And of course, during the time that we've been in office, the member was able to get another truck. It's a tanker. It was on the island of Eleuthera. And they had to go to Eleuthera and bring that truck through the night in order to keep that fire contained. And it worked. And that's why today we can give God thanks for his mercies. Mr. Speaker, I would also take this opportunity to offer my condolences to a cousin of mine, Elboy Johnson in Harbour Island, a young man who's passed on, he and his family. And also to Mr. Warren Grant of Harbour Island, a warrior of the Free National Movement, gave his entire life, and all that he could have given, he did that. But there's one person, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak about, and I'm going to cut my speech short because time is running out. Reverend Earl Pinder from Deep Creek, who served in the constituency which I am a part of. Today, we don't know who's going to fill his shoes in Deep Creek. Mr. Pinder was a gentleman who, no matter what meetings you had, whether it was political meetings, whether it was church meetings, whether it was community meetings, Earl Pinder, when he could have got there, he was there. He served his people. He did an excellent job. And today, Mr. Deputy, he has passed on. And the question is, who's going to fill those shoes in Saudi Eleuthera? But I want his family to know that our prayers are with them. We pray God's strength for them. And he will be ever remembered. He was also one of those freedom fighters who believed in the Free National Movement all of his life and gave his life and what he had to his party because he believed in them. May his soul rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, South and Central Eleuthera more than ever want to thank this government for the vision and bringing this legislation to this Honorable House today. We stand by the decisions that are made by this government, and South and Central want you to know that we support this bill wholeheartedly. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Central and South Eleuthera. Just want to add, you could take kind words to your colleague in North, our colleague in North Eleuthera. We saw him last night after the hearing, manning the phones, really leading from a distance, from this Parliament's door, actually, when we got the message. So his constituents should be very proud of his leadership, and he was instrumental, as you said, in getting that second truck over to Harbour Island that might have saved that island. So we will lend our hands in any way to the community of Eleuthera, and we look forward to him being back in this place. As many. Chair recognizes the member for Carmichael.
Speaker, may I rise and reserve for the honourable member for Kalani?
Yes.
Thank you.
Blanche. Chair recognizes the member now for Bamboo-Town.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, I will move now that the House do suspend until 3 p.m. Tuesday, the 22nd of October 2019. So we will suspend at that point in time, Mr. Deputy, and the Prime Minister will wrap up this debate. So I do now move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. Tuesday, October 2019. October 22nd. 22nd. I do second.
It's being moved and seconded that this House suspends business until 3 p.m. on the 22nd of October 2019. As many members that are in favor remain seated, those opposing will rise. Chair recognizes the member for Bamboo-Town.
I do now move for suspension.
Seconded. It's being moved and seconded that this business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. on Tuesday, the 22nd of October 2019. As many members that are in favor remain seated, those opposing will rise. The House is hereby suspended until 3 o'clock Tuesday, the 22nd of October 2019.
All right.